Carrie or Candace, where are we at?
Ready to go when you are, Madam Chair.
Perfect. All right. I'm calling this hearing of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee to order. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach. I'm the District 8 Councilor and also the Chair of Ways and Means. Today's hearing is being recorded and live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv. It's also broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and FiOS Channel 964. It's part of a council budget process that encompasses about 35 working sessions and hearings. We've had quite a number already with BPS, which is appropriate since it makes up more than a third of the city's operating budget. And we do really encourage residents to come and get involved and share your public testimony in this process, since, our budget is really a statement of what we're going to do on your behalf as a city government in the year ahead. So there's a couple different ways to do that. You can send us written testimony at ccc.wm@boston.gov. If you want to come testify in the Zoom, you can go to boston.gov/budget-testify, find out how to sign up there. You can also upload a video of yourself if you want us to just attach it to a hearing that we have if you're not able to join. And then I want to highlight that tonight at 6 p.m., we're having a dedicated public testimony hearing focused on the BPS budget. So the idea of that is that if these daytime hearings are not convenient to you, but you want to be heard on the BPS budget, you can come and speak to the council at 6. That hearing will get going as soon as we gavel it in straight to public testimony. There's not a presentation, et cetera. So if you want to make your voice heard, that opportunity this evening will be a good one as well. And then we have a final 6 p.m. June 3rd budget public testimony hearing that's about any aspect of the budget. So you can also come talk to us there. And you can always tweet at us using the hashtag BOSSBudget, BOS budget, with comments and questions. So today's hearing is on docket 0524 to 0526, orders for the FY22 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations for the school department and for other post-employment benefits. Docket 0527 to 0528, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations. And docket 0529 to 0531, orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. Those are just the dockets for all of the budget, and BPS is involved in all of those because, as I said, they're part of our operating budget and also our capital budget. Our focus area today will be Boston Public Schools, and specifically commitment 5 and 6 in their strategic plan. So commitment 5 is cultivate trust, and some of the subtopics we'll be considering are the admin budget for central office, leaves of absence, workers' comp, retention, BPS transportation, BPS school safety, food and nutrition services, BPS athletics, so all those kinds of things. And then the commitment 6 in the strategic plan is activate partnerships. So we'll be focusing as well on the partnerships that BPS has with many entities across the city. I'm pleased to be joined today by my colleagues, Councillor Ed Flynn of District 2, Councillor Liz Braden of District 9, Councillor Anissa Sabi-George at large, Councillor Michael Flaherty at large, Councillor Michelle Wu at large, and Councillor Andrea Campbell of District 4. And we're joined as well by an extensive BPS team, but it is helmed by Superintendent Brenda Caselius. And now, without further ado, I will pass it over to her to start us off.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, council members and the listening public and my team. I am just really thrilled to be here with you, actually. It is our last City Council hearing, and I can't thank you enough, Chair, for working with us on getting the message out to the public about this amazing budget. We are very fortunate in Boston to have the support of the city and of Mayor Janey and former Mayor Walsh with this 100-year commitment that the city has made. It has put us in a position to really recover strong and to return well this fall. And as we begin to think about reimagining the level of engagement you've had around our commitments with the new ESSER funding as well, and how that can braid and blend with these additional dollars that we are dedicating from the city in order to provide ongoing supports, plus new supports that are coming in to really look at how we support our kids during this post-pandemic time, hopefully coming this fall as we begin to reopen our schools, reopen the city, and work together in partnership as we have through this entire pandemic. Today, you're going to hear from my team around Activate partnerships, and that was an addition to our strategic plan from our chair, Alex Oliver Davila, who really believes in partnerships and was the one behind adding that commitment to our strategic plan. We had originally come with 5 commitments. And then, the other one is around cultivating trust. I can't talk enough about the importance of trust and the fact that BPS has some work to do still with that area. And we recognize that and are striving to do better by our public. And part of what you'll hear today from the team members at BPS will be around some of the action steps we've taken to do that, and action steps we will be taking to continue to cultivate trust within our community. You're going to be hearing from our food nutrition service workers who have served over 6 million meals this past year. I'm incredibly proud of the work that they've done to make sure children had full tummies, and that allows us to give them full minds. And also you'll hear from our athletic department, who had to reinvent how to do athletics remotely. And then also some of the vision that we're thinking about moving forward as we look to transform our high schools. And then from our OHC department and our commitments to our workforce diversity, and really setting some strong accountability measures to our goals. As you know, we're under the Garrity order, and we have not yet met those goals underneath this decades-old order. And we really are taking a sharp focus on ensuring that our children have teachers and educators who look like them, who speak their languages, and who respect the culture and heritage that they come every day to our classrooms with. And so I just want to say thank you again for these hearings that you've been holding. And the team is here to answer any questions. I'll be here with you just a little bit longer, but I'm going to turn it over to Miriam Rubin, who has been an outstanding leader in our financial department under Chief Cooter's leadership. So thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. And good morning, counselors. We're happy to be back with you for our final budget hearing of the season, where we will focus, as we've said, on examining commitment 5 and 6 of our strategic plan, which focus on cultivating trust and activating partnerships. And I'll just give us a minute to share the screen. All right, so we begin with our next slide, which starts with, as we've been starting all of our presentations this season, grounded in this statement from the Opportunity and Achievement Gaps Policy, which continues to be the principle upon which our work is guided. The FY22 budget, a proposed $1.3 billion general fund allocation, features targeted investments in academics, health and wellness, and community supports. This morning's session will focus on the ways that the budget supports the operations that are essential to keeping our schools running smoothly, and also the ways that we envision leveraging the wonderful partners we have across the city to reinforce the school-based investments that we have made. The budget that we are presenting for FY22 would not be possible, of course, without the $100 million 3-year commitment we have received from the city that has not only allowed us to maintain our existing programming, but also has enabled us to make critical investments for our students. Our vision for FY22 is structured around 3 main sources of funding: our general funds, which includes a $36 million investment from the city, part of that $100 million 3-year commitment; federal funding to support us in addressing the impact of COVID-19 on our district; and capital funding, which goes to supporting new schools and upgrading school facilities, and which we talked about more in the previous hearing. This slide represents the funding that we have received and additional funding that we anticipate receiving from the federal government for COVID-19 recovery. And we know that this will be an essential piece of the puzzle as we plan for FY22 and beyond. As we think about our budget and plans for FY22, we know that we are facing a multi-year challenge to emerge stronger than before we were hit by this pandemic. And it is for that reason that we have tied our plans for FY22 to both our long-term strategic plan for the district and to our framework around COVID recovery. You heard in our previous hearings the ways we are supporting students socially and emotionally, and the wraparound approach we are taking to supporting students and families through our investments in social workers, family liaisons, and hub schools. You've also heard about our initiatives to accelerate learning and academics for our students. Today, we look forward to continuing to take you through our vision by providing an overview of the core operations we run, without which would not enable us to enter the beginning stage of our framework for this year, which is to ensure a safe return for our students so that we can then recover and reimagine what is possible going forward. The federal relief funding that we receive will be essential to all of these efforts, and we look forward to continuing to talk with you about the ways in which the funds will support this framing. To begin this hearing, we want to first provide you with an overview of some of the key changes we've made to our central office structure in order to support the district's strong return. And with that, I'll hand it over to our Chief of Staff, Mary Dillman.
Good morning, everyone. I am excited to review some important shifts that we've made to our organizational structure. So in order to best support students, school leaders, and our staff, on April 1st, the superintendent announced some updates to the team structure for the district central office. These updates came after a year of analysis and reflection, and they're designed to ensure that BPS as an organization is prepared to deliver on our strategic plan priorities and also to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. The BPS reorganization ensures that key district leadership roles and district staff overall are focused on areas of work that will ensure that Boston Public Schools return well, recover strong, and reimagine what's possible for our district. Team changes ensure our district is prepared to meet our students' social, emotional, and academic needs for the rest of this school year, this summer, which you know is going to be critical for our students' success, and also, of course, provide a strong and successful start to next school year and next fall. These teaming updates will ensure that we have alignment across our divisions in our district office to support school leaders and their teams, our families and community partners, and most importantly, our students. So I'm going to review some of those key changes for you all. Effective this past April, Indira Alvarez, who was serving as the commissioner for the City of Boston's Property Management Division, joined BPS as our Chief Operations Officer. With Indy's arrival, Sam DePina transitioned from the position of COO to start serving as our interim deputy superintendent. Additionally, Andrea Zayas joined the school superintendent team to serve as a school superintendent and add extra capacity there. And Corey Harris transitioned from Chief of Accountability to the role of Chief of Schools. Both of these shifts ensure greater attention and focus on serving our school leaders and our regional school networks. Dr. Sylvia Romero Johnson began serving as our interim Chief Academic Officer in April. With that change, Daphne Germain, who was serving as the Director of English Learner Programs and Implementation in the Office of English Learners, transitioned to serve as Acting Assistant Superintendent of the Office of English Learners. With the shift for Corey Harris to the role of Chief of Schools, Ava Mitchell is joined as our Chief of Accountability. By July 1st, we aim to have completed a national search for a deputy superintendent and a chief of academics, and we hope to have those positions filled. With those roles filled, Sam DePina will serve as our chief of student support, bringing extra attention and support directly for students and our student-facing programs. The team at BPS, and we need everyone to be successful, and we think that these organizational changes will ensure that our district is prepared to support our students, their families, our schools, and staff. Our bold goal is to close opportunity achievement gaps for students, and we know that this team is the one to realize that dream of an equitable education for every student in every classroom in every school.
Thank you. And with that, I think we'll go to the next slide and hand it over to our Deputy Director of Human Capital, Ray Catchings.
Good morning, everyone. So some of the key aspects of the work that we do behind the scenes is supporting employees. Just to give you guys a sense of where we are with leaves of absences over this year, we've used May 1st of the last 3 years as our benchmark. And you could see in 2020, we had a little bit of a dip and then that slightly increased, but the overall percentage of the BPS workforce, which is about 12,000, give or take, depending on where we are in the year, no more than 3% of that workforce is actually out on a leave of absence. Leave of absence consists of primarily maternity leaves, but there are some health reasons and personal reasons leaves as well. But again, for 2021, about 371 employees were out, but that represents about 3% of the BPS workforce. Something that's new for this, for 2020, May 2020 versus May 2021 is the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. This was a new benefit that was afforded to all employees who work for any employer for a minimum of 30 days. And you'll see here, about 886 employees access Family First benefits under the Family First Coronavirus Act. That represents about 7.2% of our overall workforce for the Boston Public Schools. And 5% had just the emergency 2 weeks in the beginning. And then another 2% accessed the expanded leave that took them up to 12 weeks off. So that is a new benefit that had not existed in any prior year. But just to give you all an overall assessment of how that has impacted our workforce, our leave numbers haven't fluctuated because of this additional federal benefit that we've had. Obviously well worth it. We needed folks to take care of themselves over this last crazy year, but just wanted to give you a snapshot of how FFCRA has impacted us in our workforce. As far as workers' comp, we have seen about an 18% reduction in the number of folks overall from last year to this year. But what I will say, although we've seen an 18% reduction in the number of folks on workers' comp, 80% of those folks were on the prior year. So they've had long-term injuries. So we are, just wanted to highlight that and call that out as well. So typically, and then I'll move forward to how we report on retention. And I think we have some other work for, in a separate presentation where we talk about diversity numbers and our percentage to hiring. So this specifically is just about how we have retained folks over this last year versus prior years. And typically our retention data doesn't come out until the big report that we do for you all in October. But just a quick benchmark, this last year, we've seen the lowest exits in the last 7 years. So we have retained a large number of our workforce. And the highest number of exits happened during the 13-14 school year. But for this past year, as of 9/30/2020, we have seen the lowest number of exits, which means we are retaining folks, which, obviously has its benefits there. So I will stop there. And then if you have any other questions, I'll be able to be around to answer them.
Thank you. And we'll move on to the next slide and hear from our new Chief of Operations, Indy Alvarez.
Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. And I will be giving I'll give you a quick overview on the operations division and their budget. And today with me is the Transportation Department Head, Della Byrne, the Food and Nutrition Services Department Head, Laura Benavides, our Athletics Director, Avery Esdale, and Safety Services Chief Coakley. Let me start off, sorry. BPS, in this slide, we'll be talking about the BPS Transportation has taken significant strides this year to improve performance while becoming more flexible and dynamic. BPS Transportation used each consecutive school reopening day as an opportunity to innovate and experiment, improving the day-to-day performance throughout the year. This slide shows a monthly customer service bus on-time performance and a hotline wait time for parents. For the last 3 months, on-time performance has been above our target of 95%. Each month, while hotline wait time has been close to or below our goal of 2 minutes max average wait. When BPS reopened for 5 days per week of the in-person learning for all K-8 students on April 26th, the bus OTP was 88%, significantly higher than past years' first day of school performance. Looking forward, we know we need to sustain and build off this year's performance. Thus, BPS Transportation is committed to putting in place long-term changes to sustain improvements and build a best in-class transportation system that meets the needs of our students and families for the long term. The key initiatives that includes the monthly performance reviews with our bus operator, TransDeb, to ensure we are using a data-driven approach to identify improvement areas, develop and execute action plans, and build increased accountability into our bus operations. And also a new customer service support portal for families and schools, which gives families new avenues to communicate with BPS Transportation and facilitate improve accountability and follow-up from the customer service team. The improved access and expanded reach when communicating with BPS families with a particular focus on improving language access and giving families new channels to communicate with us. For instance, we recently added the language queuing to our transportation hotline in Spanish, and we aim to offer additional languages this fall. A new online chat feature on our support portal, which allows families to chat with us through text if they prefer, as an alternative to call in our customer service rep in real time. These initiatives help inform the development of our FY22 budget with the ultimate goal of advancing the Transportation Department's mission to provide safe, reliable, and on-time transportation for all the students of Boston. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Thank you. Now, moving to the FY22 transportation budget. This budget builds upon initiatives and gains made this school year and furthers the Transportation Department's mission to serve the students of Boston. Highlights of the FY22 operating budgets includes investment to support students in transition, some of our highest need students in the district. This population is unfortunately growing since the COVID-19 pandemic. We're also adding the MBTA summer passes to expand student access across the calendar year and allocating additional spending to maintain our new customer service support portal that has contributed to better communication and engagement with families and schools. These are important components of the department's goals for the next school year. And that is the end of my transportation presentation. Go on to the next. Now, my next presentation is on food and nutrition. And for the food and nutrition, any specific questions, I have Laura Benavides here with us. And FY21, this year for food services has been a challenging year and a rewarding year at the same time. Throughout the pandemic, the focus has been to support our families and students through access to meal. COVID had a severe impact on our services, but it did not stop our staff from successfully providing over 6 million meals, including the delivery of 1.6 million meals to homes and over 500 pounds of groceries to families. These grocery boxes was a collaborative effort with the City of Boston Office of Food Access and the USDA. We also collaborated with the Homeless Education Resource Network office and provided over 20,000 meals to our BPS homeless families that could not get to the sites or live out of the district. Meals were provided in schools meal pickup sites and delivered to homes. For our families that chose remote learning, we continue to have super sites available on Mondays and Thursdays from 10 to 6 to provide multiple meals for pickup. As more students return to school, we minimize the number of sites and the hours available. The FNS budget is dependent on the student participation. With the impact of COVID, and despite serving over 6 million meals, our costs were significant in comparison to our revenue. Our loss of daily participation resulted in revenues decrease of 32%, resulting in a loss of over 12 million. Prior to COVID, we were moving away from pre-plated meals into programs where meals are prepared on site and create choices for students. Our student participation dropped by 90%, yet our food costs per meal increased by over 100%. Due to safety and uncertainty of operations and combat food waste, we were utilizing more pre-plated meals, which increased costs. More than 500 BPS food service staff were available and prepared to serve meals at almost 3,000 daily hours. We're experiencing a projected deficit, yet we have used CARES funding to offset costs, and we anticipate support of 14 million. Lastly, I'd like to provide updates on some initiatives that have a positive impact on our students and community. As we have seen and heard, food insecurity is a reality across the country and certainly exists in our community. The survey released by the Greater Boston Food Bank showcased that during the pandemic year, food insecurity increased by 55% and hit our most vulnerable populations, families with children and people of color. Our goal is to continue to create a structural change in our food system to confront hunger, strengthen equity, and increase access to meals. Two key initiatives are impacting us now. The current access to food funds under the pandemic EBT cards will continue for the rest of the school year. To date, over $70 million have been allocated to our BPS families. Additionally, the USDA announced the expansion of the current meal waivers that will allow us to offer meals at no cost to children under the age of 18 until June of 2022. Specifically, parents can continue to pick up meals for their children, which allows the district to continue to offer meals outside of regular breakfast and lunch hours and multiple meal pickups. Now, going into FY22, for the upcoming fiscal year, we continue to focus on engaging students and move towards processes that are recognized by our students, which include cooking on site, choices, and fresh products. Our focus is on operations, labor and facilities, and food. Our expenses for our budget include, for our facilities and cafeteria upgrades, to date, we have completed the build out of 60 kitchens and are scheduled for 19 more construction projects this summer. This is our fourth phase in converting kitchens to provide fresh on-site prepared meals for students. With the new kitchens, we have budgeted for an additional 125 food service staff positions, totaling 1.3 million to provide meals in the new model. Most of the kitchens will go from one person on-site heating and serving meals to 3 people that will now cook, prep, and serve meals. Through this transition, the cooking on-site use the less pre-plated meals. An emphasis on training, operations, culinary support is required to cultivate the learning and growth and staff to continuously improve services to students, resulting in positions focused on training, operations, and culinary supports. Key positions have been budgeted to meet those needs. Additional funding have been allocated to develop training center test kitchens in existing central kitchen facilities. These new initiatives will continue to drive our initiatives to develop, change, or tweak our recipes per student feedback and meeting culturally relevant requests. The facilities will also develop our staff in cooking techniques to create consistency and minimize waste and inspire creativity. In food, the menu is what drives our students to our cafeteria. We are focused on improving our cooking and recipe techniques, but also continuous upgrades of the food and products we purchase to serve our students. This year, we continue to have our procurement process to reflect the city ordinance of good food purchasing. All RFP release will be submitting baseline data, and FNS will be conducted assessment of our procurement purchases in the key values highlighted by the ordinance. Local economies, valued workforce, animal welfare, environmental sustainability, and nutrition. These assessments will assist the department in further developing purchasing goals to meet the values. Through some of the processes utilized this year, we have incorporated partnerships with 4 local farms that will be providing our fruits and vegetables for the upcoming school years. We anticipate the expansion of more fresh and local products through the support of the ordinance and through changing produce and grocery processes into the RFPs. We expect savings of 5 to 9% in our food costs, which will allow us to further reinvest these savings into our program. Thank you very much. That's the end of my FNS presentation. With athletics, we have, I'm trying to, my computer can't, sorry. 2 seconds. In the athletics department, we've modified seasons. Modified seasons did not start the formal athletics until January 2021. The winter sports is from January to February. We had girls basketball, 13 varsity sets JV. With boys basketball, there were 16 varsities team and 11 JV, and boy ice hockey and girls ice hockey teams. There is, in the fall, we will be having the football, cheerleading, swimming, volleyball, and boys and girls soccer teams. During springtime, the softball, baseball, outdoor track and field, boys volleyball, and wrestling teams will be back on track, and operational funds repurposed to support modification, increase health and safety protocols, operational support, safety and facilities, streaming events. In FY22, we're return to delivery of all high school intergalactic sports and standard sports season, resume middle level and Special Olympics, financial investment to support athletic training grant, the Corey Stringer Institute, in effort to support greater access to athletic trainers. And that's it for my athletics presentation. Thank you. Next. Today with me, we have Chief Coakley, and this is probably going to be, let me try to keep up. Safety Service Department will remain a budget neutral from FY21 to FY22. Safety Service will continue to support the food services and athletics departments through 21-22 and include in spring and summer events. The department does not anticipate any budget increase to the department at this time. And thank you. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you for having me and our team here today. If you have any questions, please let us know. We're here to answer any of them.
Good morning. My name is Margaret Farmer, and I'm Executive Director of Development and Partnerships at BPS, and it is my honor to speak with you today. Regarding partnerships, we have made several changes that we believe are for the positive in the past year. Last year, we created and are now implementing a partner engagement plan. These are monthly meetings and are meant to assist partners with effective implementation of services and support. In particular, we are setting guidelines and creating expectations for partners to make it easier for them to interact with schools. In addition, this is allowing us to increase support to diverse community-based organizations by providing trainings. We've already had several this year and are actually having another one later on this month This is meant to allow smaller organizations to have access to learning that they might normally have to engage a contractor or some outside source for. It also helps us provide additional detail to our partners in regards to how we, BPS, are working to become a non-racist organization and how we expect them to live that as well. We have also created an academic partnerships collaborative. This is a small number of partners with an academic focus who are interested in engaging in strategic planning and providing a review of proposed programs or plans. We're hoping to use them as a kind of mind trust to think about forward thinking. In particular, we're talking with them about the academic tutoring model that has been engaged during the pandemic to a great deal of success, and how we can continue to leverage that success as we move forward to meet the needs of students. One additional example of how we're working with them is talking with them about how technology has been useful in the classroom and where we can continue to improve and leverage that with partners to allow access for students for additional resources. Next slide, please. As a quick review, BPS maintains a large number of post-secondary partnerships with both local colleges and academic institutions. Those are continuing this year and are providing students with additional services, including Saturday study sessions, personalized advising, and providing guidance around applying to colleges. In addition, the Boston Private Industry Council, the PIC, who I know you are all familiar with, is actively working this summer with our students to provide them with job and internship opportunities. Many of those are going to continue to be online. However, a great number of them are converting to in-person as restrictions continue to be lifted. I've included additional information on the slide about information that's been presented previously, because it does work. They do work directly with the partnerships office, and I welcome questions about them. I turn this back over to Miriam Rubin, who will move us along. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. So to close us out, before we hand it back for questions, just want to remind everybody that all the budget materials we presented today and have presented in past hearings are available on our website at bostonpublicschools.org/budget. And on the next slide, you'll see the list of hearings that we've had and the last upcoming opportunity for public testimony, which is tonight at 6 p.m. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Counselor Bach. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Miriam, and to the whole team for the presentation. As is our want, we'll just jump right into questions. So Counselor should have the order. First up is Counselor Flynn, then Counselor Braden, and Counselor Asabi-George. Counselor Flynn.
Thank you, Council Bach, and thank you to the BPS superintendent and team for their presentation today. Want to focus on a couple issues, especially the hunger and food access related issues. What are we specifically doing this summer to reach students and their families in public housing developments or hard to reach neighborhoods across the city? What type of outreach are we providing them? How are we communicating with them? And are we communicating with that student in the language the student or the parent speak?
Yes, I'm going to, the director of FNS is on, and she will be able to answer some of the initiatives and things that we're working on for this summer. Laura, can you answer the counselor's question at this time?
I think she might have stepped away for a moment, so either somebody else from the team can answer, or if
I apologize. I did. I stepped away to the ladies' room. I apologize. What was the question? I'm sorry.
The question was, during the summertime, how are we reaching students and their families on food access issues when students live in public housing, when students live in hard to reach areas, or when the student or the parent might not speak English? How are we how are we calling them, how are we contacting them, communicating with them, and getting the food to them?
Sure. Thank you, Councilor Flynn, for that question. So for this summer, we will be continuing the same process that we utilized last year during the pandemic. So our last day of school is on June 18th, but starting June 21st, food services will continue to have open our food access sites in the evening as well as during the day, so we can make sure our families are able to come get the meals. And we will continue on, we will expand those locations into the 80 additional locations where we will have summer programs from July 6th all the way until the end of the summer program, so that we will have those access. We will also be we have been working with the Office of Food Access to continue to work with their programs so that we can be able to open up pockets of locations where we see that there may not be easy access to our sites. We've also worked with them, and they have in the past and will continue to write all of our documents and information, flyers, anything that we share with our families in about 9 different languages, so that we can provide those to our families when they come to pick up meals. We put flyers in the bags, or as well as when we send out messages to the families.
Okay. My second question is, during this pandemic, we talk a lot about reimagining the new system. What are we doing in terms of hiring teachers and BPS administrators or staff that speak Cantonese and Mandarin? Are we communicating effectively with the Chinese community? And do we have any people that speak Cantonese and Mandarin in senior BPS leadership?
Our cultivation and recruitment team is working with the Asian community to try to identify areas where we can recruit. We've been pretty aggressive about trying to increase our numbers across all diversity, but can certainly get the exact numbers to you a little later.
Yeah, do we have more information than that, Albert, with all due respect? Do we have senior BPS people that speak Cantonese and Mandarin?
We do have some members on the BPS team, but I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, and I can get that to you.
And anybody else from the BPS team want to weigh in on that for me?
I will. How you doing, Councilor Flynn?
Good.
We have pulled some numbers and working with the OELL office on linguistic diversity across all of our work groups. So unfortunately, we don't have right now, but we can pull that for you. Not only in senior leadership, but we have been taking a look at all the BPS home languages to make sure we do have, it hasn't been widely publicized yet, but we are actually working on making sure our linguistic diversity reflects the composition of the students that we serve. So that you'll see that campaign coming further in the future, but we are preparing for that behind the scenes and taking a look at our existing workforce and sort of where are the gaps. But I can get you those numbers and what the actual initiatives are to increase the diversity. We just don't have it right now.
Okay, okay. I accept that answer. Thank you. But I'm just trying to figure. Let me try it one more time. Is there someone on the BPS team that speaks Cantonese and Mandarin that I can speak with, or someone from my staff can speak with, or families can speak with? Do we have anyone on the BPS leadership team? I'm sure you guys know if there is someone.
So I don't know if anybody else does, but if we need, one, we have translation services, obviously, that we could support any community member that needs to communicate with any member of the senior leadership team. But I don't think, offhand, it's kind of hard to tell. I self-identify right now. So again, we have to pull those self-identified reports in order to be able to see that, but we don't know offhand.
Yeah, and we're also currently working with the OELL office to survey all of our employees so that we have that information readily available once we complete that survey.
Counselor, I just
Okay.
want to make sure I'm understanding your question. You're talking about at a whole at BPS? Do we have this?
No, the senior leadership team
Senior
that's
leadership
here
team.
present, is there someone that speaks Cantonese and Mandarin?
So you're talking about the superintendent's executive cabinet?
Yeah.
The answer is no to that.
Oh, no.
Best of my
Oh.
knowledge.
I didn't understand your question. So yes, no, we do not.
And what is the reason that we don't have someone that doesn't speak Cantonese and Mandarin?
Yeah, I think this is something the superintendent continues to be committed to. She has the most diverse executive cabinet in the history at BPS. But as we all need to do, we need to continue to strive towards building a more diverse cabinet that is representative of the city. And I know that the human capital team has been intentional about doing that outreach. We have some open positions now. We're really trying to get that cross-section of diverse candidates to consider for those positions.
Okay, this is my last point. Thank you to the BPS team for being here. I'm disappointed in all of these responses, to be honest with you. I have respect for you. I have respect for you, what you're doing, but I'm very disappointed. Thank you, Council Barker.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Braden, and then Councillor Asabi George. Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the team for your presentation this morning. I really want to thank you for the incredible work that in terms of food access and food support for our students this past year during a very, very difficult time. And it is, it's been a lifeline for many families. I had a question about the My Way Cafe. How many of My Way cafes do we now have in Alston, Brighton? I know there's a new one down at the Gardner that was probably installed last year, but has not been used yet because of the this remote learning for some time. But I'd like to know how many, and also in terms of the selection of food, in terms of cultural sensitivity to different dietary requirements according to ethnic origin or religious tradition. Do we have access to halal food and kosher food and vegetarian options for students who may not eat American diet? Just a question. And also in terms of the PIC, they do incredible work partnering our students with potential job placements and mentoring, etc. What numbers are you anticipating for the summer program this year to participate in internships and placements with PIC? Thank you.
I can go ahead and answer the questions regarding food services. Thank you for the compliment for the staff. We've worked really hard to making sure it would seem like a seamless process for getting access to meals for children. So thank you, and I will share that with them. For your question in reference to how many My Way cafes we have in the Alston Brighton, all of the cafeterias have been built out, and they were built out in summer of 2020. So we were planning to roll them out this year, but because of the COVID pandemic, we took a step back. But they are on the schedule to be rolled out this coming school year. With the exception of the Gardner, we were able to do that actually yesterday. So we've been utilizing the kitchen. We had our staffing out there. It was been really great. And then I can also share with you the final list. But yes, all of the kitchens out there have been built out. In reference to providing meals with cultural relevance or concerns or dietary restrictions for our staff, for our students, we do have forms and files that we work with the nurse's office or anyone that presents, or the family that presents this information that have dietary restrictions for our staff. But at the moment, for the USDA regulations require us that we are able to make accommodations for our students that have dietary restrictions, and they have to be updated with a medical medical request from a doctor. However, we do offer vegetarian options. Our menu guidelines that we've just updated will also be including vegan options for next school year. And we're constantly working with our staff and our students to be able to get feedback regarding other options that our children are asking for.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. The pick, sorry, go back. There was a question about
absolutely. Actually, this is excellent timing. We received updated numbers from the PIC just this morning. So they are looking at an approximately 10% increase over the 588 placements last summer to approximately 650 this summer. They're also looking at an increasing placements at community-based nonprofit jobs and internships from 467 last year, excuse me, to 540 this summer. And the number of PIC-related students connecting with retail and food service jobs will increase from last summer's 706 placements. Yes, correct. And then we also will personally, BPS will be hosting 75 students for in-person and hybrid internships as well. And those will also be paid.
Excellent. Thank you so much it's a wonderful partnership. And I think it adds a lot of experience and value to our students. And thank you for working with that. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Braden. And Margaret, just sorry to follow up on that is, obvious. I think last year it was sort of a low water mark in terms of numbers of placements across a lot of summer things. So are those increases, where do they put us relative to the 2 summers prior with PIC?
I don't actually have those numbers to compare. I can certainly gather them for you and provide them to you and the rest of the committee. We had looked at this year over last year, and unfortunately, I don't have that historical data.
Yeah, it'd be great if you could get that to the committee, just because part of the dynamic of last year was we surged the Success Link programs because the privately backed ones went down in number. And so it's great to know they're going back up, but it would be good to know where that is relative to 2 years back. So
absolutely, I can get that for you. No problem.
Thanks. All right, forgive me. Thank you, Councillor Asabi-George, for your indulgence. Councillor Asabi-George.
No worries, Madam Chair. It's all very good information. Happy to just listen to some of those questions. So I've got a couple questions I'd like to ask. Hopefully I'll just use this one round. First on transportation, if we could just be quick with responses. What was the current FY21 budget dollar amount versus the actual? So what did we budget for last year and what did we spend? And then what is the actual FY22 recommended budget that's before us today?
We will have Del respond quickly.
Del.
Sorry.
And then maybe while we're waiting for Del to come in, I just want to very quickly say how grateful I am to BPS Athletics just personally for sports to have happened, I think, in a very creative way this year. My boys played hockey, football, and are currently in their baseball season. So although football was a sort of a spring A or a winter B sport, it was really great. I'm very grateful that my children in particular had an opportunity to play. And I'm certain that there are many parents across the district that are grateful their kids had an opportunity to play sports this year. Can we talk a little bit about sort of the trajectory of sports overall? Are we going to see any shifts in the new year? Especially, I have some concerns over declining enrollment. So what are we looking at for sports in the new year? And then I'm not sure if this will go to Mr. Esdale or if this might go to Mr. Cooter, thinking about Build BPS. Where do we see some opportunities for capital investments as it relates to maybe athletic fields, a significant investment in White Stadium? I think we've been long overdue for an investment there, just in general. So those are my 2 questions, transportation and athletics.
Yeah, we can start with the operating side. I know that one of the things that we've done overall is maintain operations and opportunities for students regardless of the enrollment decline. One of the things that we don't want to do is, as we start to assess what our enrollment is really going to be, whether or not it's sort of a temporary COVID era decline, or whether it's really sort of a new baseline for how many students. We didn't want to overcorrect in terms of the student opportunities, and athletics is a big part of that. So Avery can talk more about how he's approaching this fall and supporting students, but from a funding perspective, we're not making any significant changes based on enrollment. And after Avery, after you talk about that, I'll talk about the capital budget and what's in there for athletics.
Thanks, Nate. Yes, we're focused on getting our program back up and running to the level that it was prior to the pandemic. I think similar to the efforts that we're making in the district to reconnect and start to get people back involved in activities that either were modified or we weren't able to deliver at the level that we wanted to this year, to really focus on starting the fall season off on the right foot and working with our schools, with our coaches to deliver a full offering of sports as we return back to in-person learning and back to the new normal that we may be living in for a little while. I think that the piece that we are working on is to make sure that we do start our preparation and our efforts for each season in enough time to be in a position to support coaches and students and schools from that level of interest to being in a position to sign up and actually participate. So, we did a lot with, trying to help kids with physicals and paperwork and many of those pieces. And I think what we've learned is just making sure that we build in enough time so that we can really work to yield those kids that are interested in participating and create full and active programs. But I think our experience during the pandemic and our modified seasons really showed that where there's a will, there's a way. Where kids and their families and our coaches really did a great job in making the adjustments and delivering the athletics. But, we had to do some things that were, a little bit new and different to us, but people adjusted and did that seamlessly. So I think we've learned that in our school buildings, kids are flexible. And so, I think we're trying to learn from the lessons that we learned through the pandemic and build off of those, but also know that we're going back to delivering the full array and season lengths that we were able to experience prior to the pandemic.
Great, thank you for that. And then capital investments, I think about our athletic fields and outdoor spaces for all of our schools, but in particular White Stadium, I recalled that they were on some capital list around turf improvements in particular.
We have been discussing White Stadium and significant upgrades, including the turf and stadium facilities. At this time, there is not a proposal for White Stadium. As you know, we have announced in this year's capital budget several significant school building projects. And sort of when we think about White Stadium and what needs to be done, it ends up becoming a major capital project in the same way a school building would. So we have paused on that. I would just say, I think the superintendent has been emphasizing and the number of calls I think Avery's gotten from the superintendent can attest to this. She is really interested in expanding our athletics programs and had originally planned, I think we talked about this earlier in the hearing, had originally planned for athletics expansions to be part of the year 2 of that 3-year $100 million commitment. Given the pandemic and some of our prioritization for health and safety, social emotional supports, we've sort of changed the sequence of this. And so as part of both the ESSER planning, capital planning, and then also operating planning going into the next year, she's looking for us to really think about what are those opportunities we want our students to have. The same opportunities that they could expect to have if they were in a suburban school, or that many of us would provide for our children if their schools did not provide it. And so that's across arts, athletics, music, all of these things we need to expand. And, I don't need to tell you, you've been, I think, at every ball field in the city with your boys. but we need more opportunities for our kids, and then it's about the equipment.
Yeah.
So we're thinking about athletic equipment purchases as potentially part of ESSER. It's about operating costs and making sure we have more teams and the right teams. Part of our Build BPS theory of action around 7 to 12s is getting those kids in the middle grades access to more athletics opportunities. And then you're absolutely right. We need to prioritize capital improvements and better. There are locker room improvement projects, part of Title IX upgrades that are in this year's budget, but we need a more comprehensive plan for athletics as well. And I'm a big fan of that.
Great. Thank you very much, Nate. I think that our athletics in particular are very much tied to social and emotional help. I know that for my family, I can speak for my family specifically, and for the families that I chatted with on the sidelines, that, you know, it was a huge boost for our kids who were doing school, especially at the older grades, the high school levels, doing school from home almost the entire year. I see that the gavel's up. I'm not sure if Dell has the opportunity to just do quick dollars for me.
Yep, I'm here. So for budgeted for fiscal year 2021, transportation budgeted $131 million. For fiscal year 21, our current projected actuals is $132 million. And out of that $132 million, $12 million went towards COVID-related costs. For fiscal year 22, budgeted $137 million. We had increases due to CBA, pay increases, students in transition services increases, summer MBTA passes for BPS student expansion, and growth in bus monitor due to consistent year-over-year increases in students requiring services due to their IEPs.
Great, thank you, Delverne, for being very clear about that. You know, we're looking now at a fiscal year FY22 transportation budget of $137 million. That is, you know, 131 is the largest we've ever seen. Now we're budgeting for 137. We traditionally always go over. You know, in our next budget cycle or the budget cycle after that, we're going to be pushing $150 million for a school system with declining enrollment. I appreciate and support the idea of putting in bus monitors. I think we have to do that. Obviously, the COVID protocols are incredibly important, but this is a tremendous amount of money that's not going into classrooms. I'd much rather see that money invested into very student-facing efforts in the classroom. I'll save the rest of my questions for the next round. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sabi George. Next up is Councillor Flaherty, then it's Wu, Campbell, Mejia. Councillor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll pick up where our colleague, Councillor Sabi George left off and emphasize, obviously, we're putting more money into fuel, maintenance and repair of vehicles, money that could be better spent in the classroom for teaching and learning, smaller class size, 2 teachers per class, working on improving services for special education, as well as having a legit, bona fide, state-of-the-art, #1 in the state trade school. And so lots of things we could do and spend those precious dollars on. So the first question, I guess, a combo question is, are we still under the transportation budget we were in February? And what is the long-term transportation plan for the school district? That's sort of my first question in 2 parts. Second question I have is I want to talk a little bit about the hub school initiatives and what partnerships are being activated there. My third question is how many seats will students have access to? And again, I can't stress enough how critically important it is that we provide concrete pathways to jobs that are growing and predicted to grow right in our own backyard, right here in the South Boston waterfront and beyond. STEM, tech, so post-secondary partnerships will give us the opportunities to connect those kids to those opportunities to help close the opportunity and the wealth gap. You know, as CEOs are moving their companies here, we want to make sure that that economic opportunity spreads throughout South Boston and throughout the entire city. And so I'm going to be watching closely to see how we're responding to the predictable future job market, and are we going to prepare our students for those job opportunities? And also, it's my understanding that the district is undergoing a strategic planning process regarding our school safety. I cannot tell you the number of parents that call me. Their children get bullied on the way to school. Their children get bullied in classroom and during school hours, and their children get bullied on the way home from school. And quite frankly, they like the idea of having some type of presence at the school site. So I guess what's the plan? And what are we going to do about school safety as it pertains to having a school police department available to assist children getting bullied, but also the activity that takes place more probably in the older grades, where there's some drug activity and there's some gang recruitment activity, et cetera. So that's it for me, Madam Chair. I'll listen carefully, and also want to double down on Council Flynn, particularly in light of what happened during the school committee hearing this year. The fact that we don't have someone in a leadership position, a decision-making position at the school department that speaks, that does not speak Chinese or Mandarin, sort of doubles down on that. So I'm going to reiterate what Council Flynn said, and it's my hope at the next council hearing or the next council budget hearing with the school department, we will have someone that will represent the Asian community in a leadership position and that speaks Chinese and Mandarin. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the superintendent and her team for the work that they've been doing throughout the pandemic as we try to reopen. But these are very important questions. And I know there's the buzzwords about reimagine and strategic. I've heard them all. I'm the longest serving counselor here. I want results. I'm tired of the all sizzle, no steak, and where's the beef? I want to get to how do we improve the quality of education? No fancy term, no buzzword, nothing. I want to know what are the metrics that we are using to improve the quality of education for all of our children, because BPS educates all of our children. But I think sometimes we get caught up in the fancy terms and the buzzwords and the head fakes. I want real metrics and I want real results. And it starts with, our K0. It starts with our middle schools, like our elementary and middle schools. It starts with our high schools. It's on the ball fields and the hockey rinks. And it's in a trade school. It's all of it. It's a full court press. And I think sometimes we get distracted and we're oftentimes dealing with, whether it's special interest groups or different fiefdoms that come in. And, at some point it needs to be about the quality of education and what are our kids getting out of the education that in the classroom and on the field. And for me, save the fancy terms, just give me results. And that's where I'm at. So thank you to the superintendent and her team. Look forward to listening to the answers. And thank you to the chair and my colleagues for letting me vent a little bit on my frustration that I have with how we spend money and the metrics that we use.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. And the one thing I will just say is we did get on Councillor Braden's time the numbers on the PIC, and Margaret Farmer is going to be sending those over to us in written copy for the last 3 years. So I think we'll hold on that one. But
that'd be great. So I'll withdraw that question, Madam Chair.
I'll go to the BPS now for the rest of them.
So I was hoping to see if I could get the counselor to repeat the transportation question so that Laverne could, sorry about that, Councilor.
Sure, I just want to know, one, first of all, what's the overall plan, the transportation plan, but are we operating under the February plan? We had a specific plan for February. Are we still operating under that plan, or has that plan changed since we're reopening?
Okay. And I will start. Go ahead, Del.
Thank you for that question, Counselor. So some of the plans that we were operating under in February have changed, has been updated due to us returning more students to the classrooms in person 5 days a week. And I wanted to comment on the question about like long-term transportation sort of like vision. So the transportation team plans to continue to work towards providing safe, reliable, on-time, equitable transportation, access to education to students in the city of Boston. Within the work, some of the work that we're doing, the plan is we want operational cost efficiency to be part of our culture. We're also working with BPS Finance to understand our cost drivers and how to intersect with different services we provide. For example, $80 million of our transportation cost is tied into personnel. We are open to all types of efficiency measures, but we want to make sure we have balanced conversations together with district leadership to also make sure that our students get the services they need. So in order for us to, I know that the transportation budget is a pretty big budget, $137 million going towards transportation and not in the classroom is pretty frustrating. However, I think that we need to have like larger conversations across the district with our district partners about some of like our we need to start having like policy conversations and things of that nature.
And then I will have Chief Coakley respond on the question around security and plans for safety.
Good morning again. Very good to see all of you. Very good to see you all safe and well. Councilman Flaherty, it's always wonderful to hear you and talk about the need of safety in our communities. And it's unfortunate to hear that a number of your constituents, young people, feel like they're being bullied to and from school. I think our group of behavioral health, we've been really working very significantly together over this time. It's been a quiet time for some, but we've been actively involved in the system throughout the pandemic, really being, I feel, a stable and a consistent presence within the schools and really supporting, as you saw on my side, a number of the different areas, food service, also athletics, just for that reason. I think we've been a systemic support in BPS for close to 3 decades. We've done, in my new appointment, we've really tried to expound that partnership and our engagement relationship in the community. I think right now there is a level of feeling toward police as far as a lot of things are going on across the country. But I think in Boston, we've always set an example of a model of community policing with regards to our school police. We do have a lot of work to do, and I think that my officers and our staff here is really eager and aggressively working on those changes. As a result of the recent reform bill, a number of changes are going to affect safety service beyond STAR control. So we're looking at repositioning some positions that will still be able to rely on the safety and security of our students, but some recertification, some relicensing issues within the reform that speaks to the reform are going to immensely affect our department. We're in the process of meeting with a number of outreach groups consisting of our BPS staff, our parents, our students, community organizations, really to use that input to direct us in our future positioning with our officers, as far as our officers are concerned, with or without the certification that the state has mandated as of end of December, beginning of January. But you can rest assured that the mission of the safety and security of our students is going to be at our front, and that's our most mission in what we're doing. We've also worked very closely with behavioral health and tried to come up with initiatives, and we're looking at some webinars and supports. We've been continuing our dialogues throughout the summer with young people, but we'd like to really do an intentional program to help support young people that feel like they're bullied and do some of the things that we used to do, some of those roundtables, some of those dialogues, some of those home visits that were so productive and really serviced our young people. So I hope that answers, and any other questions, just let me know.
It does, Neva. And first of all, it's great to see you and thank you. And I trust you. We go back a lot of years. We worked together. I was part of those roundtables when I was an assistant district attorney, so I know how productive they were. And clearly, I get what's going on across the country. Want to make sure that you have the resources that you need to keep our students safe. See what's going on in Portland and Seattle and San Francisco. Those cities are upside down, Neva, and we're not. And we're not because we have a good trained, experienced department in partnerships with our communities and our schools, as well as a great community policing model, the envy, quite frankly, across the country. So I appreciate your efforts. I will work with you any way I can to make sure that we're keeping our kids safe. But I don't want to see what's happening in other cities in town start to turn our schools upside down at all. So please let me know what we as a council, me in particular, because of our relationship, we go back a lot of years, and I'm grateful that you're in your position and your experience, and I trust your judgment. But don't hesitate to pick up the phone, because I want to be here to help you, because I want to make sure that I'm responding to those constituents who are concerned about their children's safety while in the school.
Absolutely.
And on their way to and from school. And we don't want it to start to, some of the violence that we're seeing in the streets. We don't want that trickling in into the hallways and into the classrooms. So I'm here to help you any way I can. I appreciate your response. And I also, because of my trust in you and how good you've been over the years, please let me know how I can help you.
No, thank you so much, and I appreciate you and the rest of the council, and I appreciate BPS really for leaning in on us and continued our progression as we move forward. We will definitely move forward. I think we've always been an example, like you said, in policing, and we're not going to stop now. I think one of the biggest advantages we have is systems like this in which we can sit down and really talk about it and work as a team together and further our department. We've also been engaging in communications with our unions. We're engaging in communications with our MPTC. We're also engaging in conversations with the Executive Office, Police, Safety, and Security. So we're definitely moving forward. So thank you so much again.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you, Councilor Flaherty. That's time for sure. So I'm just going to go next to Councilor Campbell, and then it'll be Councilor Mejia. Councilor Campbell.
Councilor Bach. Thank you, Councilor Bach. And of course, thank you to everyone on the Zoom for just your work over the year. It's obviously been a busy year with respect to COVID. So I appreciate each and every one of you and your teams. Just picking up on the BPS transportation piece, we held a hearing recently on the council side, and at that time we were, I think, budgeted at 131 million, and then we at that time I think had realized only 130 million, but clearly that's gone up since that council hearing. And so I guess clearly during COVID, most of the children did not need bus service. So if we could just, what's driving that cost, right? When a large percentage of the students are not on the buses, what's driving that cost? The fact that we didn't see any savings whatsoever, I think is really crazy, frankly. And when you think about this is millions of dollars that could be invested in sports, athletic programming, the infrastructure of our schools, you name it. So just what's driving those costs? In that council hearing, we also talked about the transportation department doing sort of exploring all of the possibilities of how we could bus our students safely, efficiently, of course, while also possibly saving resources. And there was going to be a deep dive. Just curious where we are. And if I sound a bit frustrated, I apologize, but this is one of the reasons I voted no on this BPS budget hearing years ago, was part of it was the transportation piece of the budget and the inefficiencies in this budget. So just curious where we are with respect to all of the array of options that are available to bus our students, that we can be looking at as ways in which to think about reining in these costs. I'll start there, and then I do have some questions on the disciplinary side, and Neva, and the incredible work you're doing with your team.
Yeah, thank you. And I think perhaps Indy and Dell will definitely have some more information for you. Just wanted to start with the current expenditures for this year in transportation. Just as a reminder, one of the commitments that we made as a city is to continue to hold our employees, for lack of a better term, harmless when their school was shut down. So we did commit to continue to maintain paying our food working staff and our transportation staff, despite the fact that they were not driving particular routes. That means that the bulk of our costs were really continuing throughout the year as we worked with our collective bargaining partners. We did that for a couple different reasons, not the least of which is we wanted to be able to maintain service and be ready to come back at various points. I think you'll remember throughout our many conversations, we've had a number of, probably put it indelicately, fits and starts to restarting school. And we knew that if we did any sort of layoffs of drivers or any pause to their payment, that we would then, there'd be a longer ramp up time to reopen.
What's that cost? I know before you know it, I'll see the gavel, Nate. So what's the cost of that? And I understand that keeping folks employed during the midst of COVID, this is not, the pandemic obviously wasn't caused by employees. So we want to make sure that them and their families are protected. I get that. What's that cost?
Yeah.
So
sorry, Del, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going, like the exact cost for personnel is $80 million on the transportation budget line.
Okay. And then were there any other savings? We obviously weren't using fuel, other things.
Yeah, we saw a decrease in fuel costs for sure. We did see level or slightly increased maintenance costs. We use both the cost of parts increase, but we also wanted to take this opportunity to maintain some of our buses, not be in a position where our buses, we had lapsed on maintenance. And then of course, there's the ongoing financing.
I'm still listening, Nate. I just have to plug in my laptop before it dies. Go ahead.
No problem at all. And so that's, the savings on a you would expect on a large budget like that are for fuel can be several $1 million, but it's, when you guys, when the council brings up the issues, we're not talking in transportation about trying to save, $1 million. We're talking about potentially significant reform. And we have done a number of studies of bus transportation. And I have spent the better part of my 9 years in finance grilling Del and her team on how to control cost and save money. It really comes down to some basic metrics. How many different places we transport our kids to, which is about school choice and some of the programming opportunities. How many students are eligible for transportation services? So things like walk times, walk distances to bus stops, the distance for eligibility. And then the number of runs we can do in any given day, which was the big push for start times at a different point. And so I think revisiting any of those major levers requires some pretty consistent community conversations and was not something that we could push forward during a pandemic because it would require us to.
Well, Nate, I absolutely understand that. I've been on the council for 6 years. We've been talking about this budget, this piece of the budget being unsustainable long-term because it just keeps going up, declining enrollment, it keeps going up. Still nothing to actually rein those costs in. So at some point we may be talking about a $200 million transportation budget, even though we just lost thousands of BPS families who are choosing other school systems because of dissatisfaction, a whole host of things. So at some point, from the very beginning, we've been talking about what are the array of options. We don't have to, we could be purchasing cars for families, right? Like what are the array of options that are available to us that we could then go out to community to have the conversation with? It could be hiring elders in the community to do carpooling services after doing background checks. What are the array of options? And I appreciate Adela Verne and her team, was a new team member of hers in the council hearing talking about just that. They were actually exploring all of the options. So we haven't, I think, seen anything since then as to what those possibilities are. I remember a former counselor saying, maybe we do Uber, who knows? But that's the question, is what are the array of options? It would be great to see that so that we have a greater sense of this option A could cost us 100 million, option B would cost us 250 million, to be able to have more of an informative conversation about what the future is with respect to the transportation budget. I know at some point I may see the gavel. I saw Councilor Bach come back. I just want to quickly move to public safety, security. First of all, I see Mr. Taylor in front of me, so I have to say hello. Hi, Mr. Taylor. So just on the security piece, Maeve, I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate you always not just being open-minded, but really having a conversation around policing in schools, school to prison pipeline, this idea around restorative justice. Just every time I call you, you pick up the phone to have very thoughtful conversations while also expressing the reality of where your officers are and the morale, all of that. So I really appreciate you. Just curious, we've had a whole host of conversations around restorative justice practices and models, the expansion of that, the usefulness of that. Curious where the district is in sort of investing in more of that practice. And then I think this is more of an information request of where are our school resource officers located? Which schools are they in? And I can follow up through the chair to get that. I think it came up in a previous conversation too. But if there's data around where officers are, where they're situated, what schools they're in. And I'll leave it there since I'm sure my time will be up.
Again, always a pleasure seeing you. I'm always open to engage in a wonderful conversation. I'm always open for that. I think that's what that sets us apart from other parts of the country, really being able to sit down and have an open dialogue, whether good or bad or indifferent. We always seem to come to a reasonable decision that really supports the young people in our community. So thank you for that. One, we've really been aggressive even during this time with the pandemic, and my budget doesn't reflect it, but we've engaged in several restorative justice practices with primarily our BSAC group. I think there was a recent article this morning that mentioned some challenges that they're having. I'm very happy that the superintendent stepped out in front of that and really opened up some dialogue and some intervening in that process over there. And I'm looking for good things with them. We've met with them on several different occasions and had restorative justice practices that were on our own time, that were not budgeted into our budget. And we're looking at doing that more. We realize that definitely is a significant practice. That's worked. I remember doing it almost 15, 20 years ago. So we're really looking at being intentional of that, using that as one of our models. Just participating in an equity roundtable just a couple of days ago, and really just elaborating on that thought process in my own self, thinking about really what equity means, and hoping that restorative justice can play a significant role in that process of equity, not just using arrest or a code of conduct as a mode of discipline, but really looking at other options and having partnerships and resources that you can resort to as a mode of other than arrest. So those are some of the things I'm looking at. I do have the schools that we are positioned at. The list is kind of significant, so we can offer that to you in a written report. They have decreased, I must admit. My numbers have decreased significantly within the last 9-10 months here. So a lot of the schools that we really were paying a lot of attention for as far as staffing is concerned have been significantly decreased as a result of my staff. So I'm going to be looking at that, particularly for next year, coming back in and looking at the numbers somewhat being the same as far as the population of our students, and that's how we dictate our deployment numbers. And it's been very successful. I think that we can look back on in other schools in other parts of the country that are having significant issues within their schools based on the number of officers that they have. But I think that Boston, we have not had those issues. And as a result, we're also decreasing in arrest and in detention as well.
Thank you so much. And I see the gavel and can save questions or follow up via email. So thank you guys. Stay safe and healthy. And thank you, Councilor Bach.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Campbell. And we'll definitely get that report from the district. Before I go to Councilor Mejia, I just have to let BPS said that they do have an answer on Cantonese speakers on the staff in general. Obviously, that doesn't address the senior leadership question that Councilor Flynn was also raising, but I do just want to let Ray give that factual answer, and then we'll go to Councilor Mejia.
Thank you so much. So we have our student composition, and this was as of in December 2020. The student composition is 2.9% of students speak Mandarin and Cantonese. That has not been separated out, so the two are combined, compared to 2.4% of teachers and guidance counselors. So that's the deepest drill down that we have right now. Overall, 222 staff members identify as speaking Mandarin and Cantonese, excuse me. And of the 222, 34 of them are listed in the chief level and the deputy chief level of that org chart that Mary had just pointed out to you earlier. So still a little bit more drill down to do, I think, to answer some specific questions for you, Councillor Flynn, but that is sort of getting us closer to, I think, what you were asking for. We have 34 folks at the deputy and chief levels that identify as speaking Mandarin and Cantonese.
And we do have Asian American and Pacific Islander Infinity Group that includes the Asian community, working with the recruitment team to come up with strategies to help us better recruit at all levels across the district. So it is something that we're very conscious of and definitely working towards.
Thank you for your follow-up and thank you for your answers.
Thanks so much. All right, now Councillor Mejia.
Hi, yes. Good morning, all. Let me just start off by thanking you for how hard you work every day. I know it is not easy. And I also just want to share the same frustration that my colleagues shared earlier in terms of just, well, I've only been on the council for like 16 months. So, but I've been a Boston Public School, student, and now I'm a Boston Public School parent. So the level of frustration for me is decades after decades, right? And so the only thing that changes are either the characters that are now in these positions or the outfits that we're wearing. But when it comes to education, it just seems like Boston seems stuck on replay because very little gets done. And it feels like trickle down budgeting here, and not a lot of these dollars are making it into the classroom where they belong. And I think that I always like to say that we're resource rich, but coordination poor. And I can just point to some examples of some of the places where I think when we talk about public safety and trauma and where this is about partnerships. So I'm just curious, what role do nonprofits play in helping to connect students to services when they've experienced trauma? How are you all communicating with organizations from a wraparound service type of mentality? Just because I do believe that some of this can be addressed just by integrating folks and having one conversation. I'm curious about Madison Park. I hear that there's potential for some leadership change. And I'm curious to how do you think that's going to impact the stability and the work that has already been put in for the last 6 years? I know that I got an answer to that, but I just don't think in terms of retention, it just doesn't seem, it doesn't make sense. So as we're talking about retention, I'm curious, are we conducting exit interviews with teachers and staff that were unable to retain? And how are we keeping track of the major reasons why staff and faculty depart? And what are we doing to correct those problems? It would be really helpful to get an understanding on that. I'm also curious about what is the average salary for the new cafeteria positions. I believe we're going to be, there's 125 new positions. So I'm curious, I think we're allocating 1.3 million. And if the math looks right, that works out to be 10,800 for each employee. I don't know how you guys are allocating the resources, but it would be great to get a better handle on that. And I'm curious about how BPS is working, going back to the partnership conversation. How are we leveraging our smaller grassroots organizations, not the big ticket item ones, but the smaller organizations that are doing the work and oftentimes I don't see them on your website listed as partners. So what efforts are being made to open up the tent and have more diversity in some of the programming that we're offering? I do appreciate After School and Beyond, but I'm curious about some of the smaller nonprofits that are not part of your current portfolio and who I know are doing the work every day. And one last question that I'd like to just kind of pose, I'm sure I'm going to go over my time here. We held a hearing last year, and we learned that sexual assault was a growing problem among students. And I'm just curious, how does our budget reflect an increase in services to put a stop to this issue? And then I have 500 other questions for round 2.
I'll take the human capital questions. We have contracted out with a search firm to do a national search for a new leader for Madison Park High School. We did come up with some candidates last year that we were not happy with. So we did not hire and relaunched again in early January. They are now down to about 5 candidates, and we'll start the interview process, and then we'll move 3 of the top 3 to the superintendent's level to be interviewed and selected. So that's where we are with the Madison Park.
Mr. Taylor, can you tell us why are we changing leadership after 6 years of results and work? It just feels like this is what happens with our superintendent. We always have all this turnover, and now we have a new buzzword. First it was a culture of we, now it's restore, reimagine. So I just feel like every time we shift, we're shifting the culture, we're shifting priorities. So I'm just curious, why are we moving the current leadership out of that position?
Yeah, without divulging employee information that's somewhat confidential. I think it's no secret that the school hasn't been doing well for quite some time, and we want to get it right at Madison, and we do want to establish that continuity that you're talking about, which is why did like a national search in hopes to find somebody that can move that school where it needs to move to. As far as exit interviews, every single employee over the past 1.5 to 2 years, we do exit interviews. Employees leave for various different reasons, but we gather that data working with the recruitment and cultivation team and the retention team, and try to make adjustments and changes based on what that data tells us.
Can you tell us a little bit about what are some of the common themes that you're hearing as the reason why people are leaving?
Some people change because their significant other got a job in another city. Some people are leaving because they're not happy with their supervisor. Some folks say that they're leaving just because they're retiring, their retirement age, and it's just that time. It's all over the place. There's no one specific kind of thing, but that information does help us to better retain. One of the biggest things that we have found is that the cost of living in Boston is crucial to a lot of people. So, we're trying to do some things, we're trying to figure out some strategies around helping with that as well. Those are just a couple of things off the top of my head that I can remember from reading off some of that information.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. That is truth right there. We can no longer afford to live in the city that we've built. That's real. And I'm curious, in terms of partnerships, who can talk to us a little bit about some of the efforts being made to recruit and engage organizations that normally don't get any love, but are out here doing a lot of work?
Absolutely, Councilor Mejia. Margaret Farmer here, happy to respond. We are taking a multi-pronged approach to that in terms of making sure that we have partners that meet the needs of all of our students. One thing I've done is I've worked to engage more with school leaders to hear directly from them the types of partners and the types of groups of students they have that needs partners that are specific to their needs and cultural background, and have started to do more solicitation. For instance, Girls Inc. of Lynn has been brought in this year because it was they were highlighted by a school leader as an organization that provided services that they were looking for. He is me. another local organization that's been brought in specifically because a school leader said, this is the type of organization that I'm looking for. And we went and spoke to them and said, we'd like you to sign up as a partner, and we'd like to talk about you with other school leaders. Those are just two examples. We will continue to work on that and do that. We've also, what we found is we had feedback from smaller organizations that felt that it was hard to penetrate BPS. There was a lot of rules. It was hard to keep track. And that's one of the reasons that we've actually instituted the partner engagement plan, where we're having public meetings every month and saying, you need to do this in April so that you can start in September. And in April, it's something that you have 2 months to do. It's not a heavy lift. It's not something that you're scrambling around and need to find 3 staffers to put together. So there's that as well. Also on the hub school side, which I know that Councillor Flynn asked some questions on earlier, one of the things that they're doing to activate partners is they're also working with my office to look at who do the students need to meet their needs culturally and linguistically in a school. And we're working together to continue to solicit those. One area that I think that we're putting particular focus on is Haitian Creole organizations, because there are several schools that have significant populations of Haitian Creole students, and they do need support. So that's one particular focus area. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. And I want to make sure you leave time for other people. Margaret, thank you so much for being so thorough. But one more question, Councillor Bach, or are you going to give me the gavel? What's
No,
up?
we're I'm afraid we're well past the time. But we will do a second round.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Next up is Councillor Edwards. Councillor Edwards. There you are.
Hi, thank you all so much. Apologize for being late today. I just wanted to make sure to pop in to specifically talk a little bit about my district and how some of your investments in East Boston and Charlestown are. I guess I would first like an update on East Boston School specifically as we're developing and growing. If you can just give me that. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the Elliott School and the Warren Prescott. So I don't know who wants to take the kind of update for East Boston. I appreciate that. Sorry, it could be more specific, but I just needed some updates first.
I apologize, Councillor. The updates on East Boston schools, just in general related to their budgets, or what were the? I missed the intro.
No. I can be better. I apologize. My question makes no sense. But specifically, I know you had mentioned before that we were not going to have any funding cuts from our school budget. Could you speak a little bit more about the equity and access and dealing with ELL students, and if there's going to be a different weighted formula specifically for those students to help fill the gap? We could start with the high school specifically.
A great question, and I should clarify. I mentioned that there were a number of schools, there were a handful of schools throughout the city that for different programmatic purposes had received changes to their budgets and look like budget cuts. One of them is the Umana in East Boston. The Umana is going through, as you know, they're a dual language Spanish school, and that dual language program has been rolling up each year to different grades. That program is now in the middle grades, and there were shifts to the staffing as they've sort of changed from larger sort of K-8 to a more specific dual language school. In terms of English language learner programs, we have maintained capacity going this year, but as you know, in East Boston in particular, we have seen a decrease in the number of English learners over the last few years. There's been a lot of conversations around immigration patterns, impact of potential gentrification in East Boston. I don't need to tell you any of this, you know better than I do. What we have done is maintain the programming going into next year. And for the East Boston High School, as they build out their 7th and 8th grades to be a 7-12, we're starting to fund the capacity before we see the enrollment. So we're working with Principal Brangiforti, head of school Brangiforti, to understand what's the program he wants to build as he rolls it up, and starting to fund it, not on a WSF basis straightforward, but more on sort of a capacity, what do you need until the enrollment grows up. And the last thing, I'll try not to make this too rambling of an answer. We have identified different challenges regarding weighted student funding and English learner services. And so the challenge comes because in schools where there are only a small number of English learners, there aren't the sort of return to scale that happens. And so the costs exceed what weighted student funding would typically provide for that. In those cases, we have always guaranteed, or I should always, in the last 5 years in particular, we're focused on guaranteeing that all of the schools have the resources they need to serve their English learners, that they have the staffing that they need to serve the English learners. And if there's a shift in enrollment in the fall, we then fund additional positions in the fall to meet the needs of English learners. And there is a sort of refresh that we need to do and a re-looking at how we fund our English learner programs and weighted student funding. But that's a long-term project, and we're trying to figure out in all of the major commitments we've made going into next year, where WSF refresh really fits into that overall priority, given some of the other major projects we're moving forward.
Well, thank you. And I do appreciate that, because I do think that as the weighted student form, we may have fewer English language learners. It doesn't, I think the investment though in learning English and the money is still very much necessary. So a reduction in numbers of students doesn't mean that we should necessarily automatically reduce the budget. I think that in some cases, we're finally funding ELL and other services at the level they needed to. And that's not for the lack of the city. Oftentimes it's due to lack of state funding to help. I wanted to talk a little bit about food access and food insecurity. As you may know, East Boston had the highest, two things, the highest request for rent assistance and the highest request and the highest amount of people getting food access and food insecurity. Now I know, thank you, we brought up the My Way Cafe and the quality of food, revamping our kitchens to make sure that the kids had access to quality food. But have we learned any lessons about making sure that how schools have really been a center for food access for kids who are food insecure in their homes? And this pandemic really highlighted how many people really were. In short, have we gone back to what we already had before, or have you changed the system for food access for students throughout BPS? But I'm speaking specifically about East Boston.
I think, thank you for the question, Counselor. I want to have Laura Benavides go on and give you the details on that. Laura, are you on? Okay, you go.
I'm sorry, I just keep stepping in with the wrong time. I apologize. Counselor Edwards, will you please repeat your question? Thank you.
No problem, Laura. I'm wondering what lessons have been learned from this pandemic and food access. Thank you again for your leadership on My Way Cafe and really helping the quality of the food. And you kicked it off in East Boston. I know, I was there, I ate it. And so there's no doubt about the commitment to truly healthy living for our kids. But what we saw in East Boston was a disproportionate amount of food insecurity that was really, I think, reflected. And so we know it's high. And to just go back to what we had before, which I believe is breakfast and lunch in the schools, right? To just go back to that, is that enough? Or do we need to revamp how we provide food? Is there going to be a dinner program? Are we going to continue with some food coming from our schools? I'm genuinely, what lesson did we learn from this?
Certainly, lessons for us is creating access in different ways and learning how families work and how they eat is what we've continuously learned. In particular, access is not just limited to our regular schedules. It should be thought about how families are able to come to us as well. So we quickly adapted and pivoted to make sure that we had our locations were open in the evening time to accommodate for that. Certainly also knowing that families can't, it's not easy we may think it's easy to get to our sites. It's not. So that's where we were able to deliver meals to our families as well. Same thing in reference to, as we're continually thinking about it, is how do we able to continue to capture that for the next coming year? So for us, it's just how do we do have a supper program. So we're thinking about how do we able to expand that. We do have, so how do we expand it even more? So it's an opportunity for us to continuously train and share information with our administrators about opportunities to be able to have those. And we're hoping with the new rules and regulations and waivers that just passed, that they'll go into the after-school programs where families and children can pick up the meals and go home, not necessarily have to stay and participate and eat in schools. So some of those things as we are learning is that how does that access work for families as well as, for the students when they are there. I think other things that we're also thinking about is that we do know we have a few schools that do participate in the weekend backpack programs, which are funded and supported by a particular grantors. So other opportunities for us is to be able to continuously share the information that we learned through the Greater Boston Food Bank Survey that just passed, and share that the food insecurity, even with all of these different access points, whether it's through pantries and local charities and our school meals, and even with the pandemic EBT funds, food insecurity was still something that we couldn't address even with all of this access points. So for us is to work with our communities and figure out how do we as a place of trust where families can be able to come and somewhere that they know, how do we continuously be that vessel for them to be able to get meals?
Sorry if I could just
have very limited. I know if I have any time left, it's very limited, and if I have any, you can maybe respond just to the my what I learned in this pandemic and talking with teachers, talking with students, talking with parents, is how whether they were before or not, it became very clear schools were access points for social justice, for resources. Teachers were trying to get their kids rent assistance. They were trying to prevent evictions. They were trying to get them fed. They were trying to check in on them in terms of whether they are abused. It was like teachers were put on. BPS was central to access to points of justice and safety. And so that is a huge lesson to be learned. And I'm wondering, beyond just, and I agree with the counselors, I believe in having more access points. Have you thought about working or partnering with Legal Services, Volunteer Lawyers Project, or any other organization that could be a referral for your teachers to talk to if they're finding a student is facing an eviction and doesn't know what to do? I mean, kids are telling teachers, they're telling their their teachers or their coaches things about aspects of their lives, and what is beyond BPS, this individual teacher being an amazing person and going to try and help this person. Do you have a funneling system to work with nonprofits to help them? And that's my final question. Thank you so much, Counselor Bach, for your patience. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just, I appreciate you sort of flagging that the sort of central role that the schools have played during this pandemic. I would say in some ways, exactly what you're talking about is what the superintendent's vision is for sort of the hub school model. And what we have seen is the family liaison role that's been rolled out to all schools for next year is meant to be a connector, somebody who can provide. We've seen some of our family liaisons go above and beyond. But I do think your call to action here is not just that it's about individual heroes, but a collective system that responds and provides information and services to families. And I think part of the pilot for the hub schools is to get a model for how we work with social service agencies, how do we work with nonprofits, how do we connect with communities? And some of that is always going to be very neighborhood based, right? The services that are in East Boston and the partners that are in East Boston are going to be a little bit unique to those that we find in Roxbury and Rosendale. That is just the nature of a diverse city. But what we want is a consistent expectation for how do families get resources. The only two things I was just going to add to Laura's answer before was, one, we also learned how unbelievably flexible and responsive both Laura and the entire food nutrition services. I just wanted to once again take a moment to just recognize they were asked to constantly change their service delivery model. And Laura was always doing it with an unbelievable smile. And I think we also learned how little sleep she can operate under. But the other piece of that is we found what happens when the community, both the city of Boston the state and the federal government recognize that we have a crisis on our hands and we need to respond. We got pandemic, EBT cards extended. We got new models for how we were able to deliver services to students, not because we thought creatively, but because Washington broke down the bureaucratic barriers that allowed us to get reimbursed for different funds.
Okay.
So that collective crisis, right, was unfortunately took the pandemic. But when we say the pandemic revealed to us many of the social justice issues we knew were present before, what we need to figure out, and I think this body is great at doing, is continuing the focus on serving our kids and making sure that food insecurity doesn't go from a collective crisis to an individual family crisis again. And so I'm grandstanding a little bit, but I think you teed it up nicely, and I think it shows a collective call to action that we need to continue into next year beyond just how do we pay for certain things with food services.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Counselor Edwards. All right. And now I'm going to ask my questions, and then I will go to colleagues who have a second round. So Counselors Flynn, Mejia, Edwards, just let me know if you have a second round. So I guess one question, and this is maybe for Dell and team on transportation. At our transportation hearing back in February, we did talk about the need to issue a new real RFP for TransDev, the fact that we've been operating on these one-year extensions, and that, we really need to move into having a new RFP that's sort of better suited, that gives us more optionality and flexibility and kind of would help us drive the kind of cost savings that I think you've heard today, all of the council wanting, and that I know many folks inside have been trying to achieve. So we didn't have a clear update in February on where we were with that, except that there was a process underway to design such an RFP. So can you give us an update on where we are?
Dell had to step out for a moment. This is Angela Zhang, Assistant Director of Finance and Operations in BPS Transportation. Thank you for having me. Councillor Bach, appreciate the question. It does indeed follow up to the previous discussion we had. So BPS Transportation, we plan to go out to bid for the next bus operator contract early this winter, hopefully, and therefore be in a position to possibly switch vendors for school year FY22-23. We believe this is one of the most important opportunities that we have to create positive long-term change for our students, especially because the next contract will likely last for 5 to 10 years. One thing to note, though, is that the contract, even if we switch vendors, doesn't change the collective bargaining agreements that we have with the 3 unions that are technically employed through our bus operator contractor. So this is one thing that's important for budgetary reasons and also for personnel reasons. So right now what we're doing actually is we're in the process of procuring an external vendor to help support research and development into how to best structure and draft this contract for bid. And the reason for this is because based on the experience over the last 7 years, we now realize there are multiple portions of the current contract we think we can do better on, including incentive structures, technical requirements, flexibility, which is something that came up. And we also importantly want to try to figure out how to create a contract that will attract multiple bids so that we have optionality, which I think is really important. And one thing that we're understanding in our early research is that this is actually a space in which historically there has been some, I don't know if I want to say kind of game playing, but it can be a tricky space in order to actually solicit the best possible bids because it's easy to kind of build in losses into what you actually bid for the contract. So if they say, you have an incentive structure, you might say, if the downside risk is this, but they might try to actually game that by saying like, we'll just increase the price of what we bid for the contract. So there's a lot of sort of things that we're thinking about with regards to actually how to structure the contract itself. The last thing I'll say on this is that we do believe that BPS should take the 1-year renewal option for this upcoming school year. We've been thinking about this for a while, and the reason is because we are just coming out of the public health pandemic, and we feel strongly that this is not the time to create another big change for our students and families. Changing operators is a huge deal, and we have to get it right. And so rushing into that for this upcoming school year is not the answer. However, we really want to make sure that the students still get the service, the level of service that they need and require. So we are actively working with TransDev to make sure that they're building on the successes that they've achieved in the last months, to make sure there's a smooth transition for this upcoming school year. But we are indeed trying to work towards having a bid coming out this winter so that we have options coming into the following school year.
So I guess, Angela, I mean, that's good to hear, but I find myself wondering why we're not trying to get the RFP drafted and out for the fall, because it seems to me that with our budgeting cycle being what it is in BPS in the city, it would be advantageous to already have procured somebody by midwinter.
Yeah, Councilor Black, I appreciate that. The tricky thing here is actually the cycle starts in July. So the contract ends June 30th. And so one of the things, and that's part of why we are thinking towards the next cycle, because the transition point would be for July 1st in 2022.
And I get that, right. And I shouldn't have said technically, right. I understand that we would procure somebody for the 1st of July. I just think that with the amount of, like, to your point, the number of things that the school department would have to put in place in order to switch transportation vendors effectively and not have it be felt in September, it just feels like I would hate a situation where we're putting out a winter RFP and then, you know, there was some hiccup that somebody realized late, and then instead of going out January, it's going out February, and now we only got one response and we're not happy with that. So then we extended the time, and like suddenly it's like April and we haven't selected. It's easy for me to imagine us getting stuck. And I wonder if there's a reason not to put the RFP out in the field earlier, even with that July 1 start date.
I think I understand. And actually, I appreciate that, because this was something that we were talking about with Nate Cooter and also the leadership team. Is a very good push. We are actually trying to be realistic, just to be honest. We would like to try to pull it up if we can. There's no reason in our mind that we wouldn't if we have the ability to. I think when we thought about and mapped out the process steps with the head of business services at BPS, we were able to see that I think that winter was realistic given where we are and the amount of research that we want to do. One thing that we thought about as well is that technically there is one more renewal option for TransDev. So we're actually doing this. We're trying not to come down to the wire, if you will, and sort of get into a situation where we have to pick a new contractor. And again, I'm not at all saying that we want to do this, but I think part of what we're trying to do is have actually a multi-layered approach to this, where part one is we just have to make sure that TransDev and BPS deliver the service that the students require and need at any given time, so that no matter what, if we have to renew, if we don't have to renew, they get the service that they require under the current contract. And then second, I think we want to make sure that we get the contract out this year and do it, as quickly as we can, but realistically, so that we can have enough time to get a new contractor in place, or the same one if TransDev wins again for next year. But worst case scenario, if, as you say, Councilor Bach, something happens and we don't get good bids or something like that, then we actually still have one more fallback plan with another option to renew. But what we want is not to be in the same situation again, where we don't have that optionality coming into the January timeframe next year.
Yeah, I just don't think that, I think I just want to convey, and it's in some ways less for you and more for Nate and all, that I think that the sense of the council that people are trying to convey today is the sense that we have been spinning with the one-year extensions and our recurrent transportation realities for a long time. And the idea that we would sit in May of 2021 and think to ourselves, well, shoot for the moon, but like, at least we should be able to switch the contractor by July 1st, 2023. Like, I just think that, we have to do better than that. Like, and I'm not saying again, and it's not, as you've pointed out, it's not necessarily about switching the contractor, but but it is about switching the terms on which we do this business. So I sort of want to underscore, I think, the sense of urgency around that, in the sense that we know our own timelines and we know where our crunches hit. And I'm super sensitive to the fact that you've just raised about the difficulty of this. I mean, everybody saw what happened, feels like ancient history now, but when the Globe changed its delivery vendor, right? And like, the last thing you all would want is a situation where we're sending kids back to school and we've got weeks at the beginning of September where nobody's routes are running effectively or on time. So I get this is a really sensitive thing. I just think that it's also an enormous 10% of our budget thing. And it would be easy for us to sort of just sort of stand at the edge of the pool indefinitely.
Yeah, if I could, Councilor Block, I appreciate the comparison to the Globe. Just when we switched from first student to trans dev at the start of this contract, there was a lot of frustration with the vendor at the time because on-time performance was so poor. It was an incredibly favorable financial contract to us, but it didn't have any performance incentives in it. So first student was losing a lot of money on our contract and we weren't getting results. So they put the contract out to bid in the hopes of doing a couple things. One, incentivize people to break up our transportation contract into 3 zones so that we could have 3 different vendors competing within the city. And then also put in performance incentives for the first time. A lot of those things didn't work and our costs shot up that year because when the bids came in, all the costs came in much higher than what our prior contract had. So I think Angela's point about what we want to do is the timelines that she laid out for you are conservative, meaning we feel extremely confident we're going to hit those timelines for next year. We also will work, and I'm sure Indy on day 50 is already thinking about how to accelerate that RFP timeline. But what we don't want to do, and the research is the part of this, what we want to do is design this well, because if we don't get it right and we don't get the bids in, we are going to renew for the 10th year, which I can't imagine what this hearing will be like next year when we do that. Because you're right, we do recognize the urgency, and I appreciate the urgency because we want to make reforms to this transportation contract. But and again, I'm a little bit taking Angela off the hook because she left off part of her title that is secret butt kicker in the transportation office. But what she's pushing us to do this as quickly as humanly possible because it's going to help us meet our goals overall. So I'll end there.
Great. No, and I want it to be, yes, a very well-designed, well-researched RFP. I just think we need to marshal whatever we need to marshal to make that happen as quickly as possible. But I'm grateful to you all. That's definitely my time. So I will go back and check on colleagues for second round questions. Councillor Flynn, did you have any second round questions?
Thank you. Thank you, Council Bork. Just wanted to follow up on some of the schools in the other parts of my district as well in South Boston, including the Condon, the Perkins, the old Gavin. They're located practically in the public housing developments and certainly the Perry as well. But do you guys can you give me an update on those 4 schools? Any challenges, any issues that we need to know about during this budget process?
As you know, the Perry has gone through the transition. They're one of our first schools to go from being a K-8 school to a K-6 school. And that was as a single strand K-8, they were having a hard time maintaining a robust 7th and 8th grade program. And that transition is now complete going into next year. The Condon School continues to be one of our more popular schools in South Boston. As you know, a lot of different programs, and there's no significant changes happening at the Condon. You mentioned the Gavin building. The Gavin building is the home of Up Academy Boston. They are one of our standalone middle schools. They serve only grades 6, 7th, and 8th, and have had some enrollment declines in the last couple years, as we've seen at our other standalone middle schools. But we have continued to maintain programming there. As part of our Build BPS announcements, we have announced that we are accelerating the timeline for transitioning our standalone middle schools into another future use. And so we have not laid out the timeline for Up Academy Boston, the Gavin building yet. We will continue to work with the Up Education Network and their team around what will be the future of that school. Obviously, it doesn't happen unilaterally. As a Horace Mann charter school, they have a lot more control over their programming, and the state has a lot more control over their grade span and programming as well. So those are the updates on, those are the three schools you mentioned, correct? I didn't know if I missed one.
Yeah, so Nate, when Up Academy is vacant, it remains BPS, a BPS building, and then BPS decides or goes through the process of trying to figure out what the best use is for it. Is that accurate?
In the other, so yeah, exactly right. We have committed in all of these standalone middle schools to continue to use them as BPS space. I would also note that we have a lot of work to do with the Up community. So it may not be that they vacate that space, though, you know, as we think about what are the other 712 options, what is the future? I know that many of the students in the Up Academy network are in Dorchester, but I don't want to lead to sort of anxiety for any of the families who may be listening of that they're a definitive move. We have a lot of engagement to be done. But the other standalone middle school buildings, including Up Gavin, we will continue to operate as BPS schools. The Up Gavin, as you know, is one of our bigger buildings, particularly in South Boston. And future uses of that building could be swing space for major construction projects in the downtown area, a future site of a K-6 school, or expanded space for any of the construction projects that would help facilitate modernizing all of the buildings in South Boston. You know, the Tynan and the Perkins, Perry, all of those schools could use modernizing, Condon as well. And so we need to be thinking about all of our buildings as how does it help us get to a place where we have excellent school buildings for all of our communities in all of our neighborhoods.
Thank you, Nate. And Nate, how's you know, one time South Boston High School was three schools: Monument, Excel, and
Odyssey.
Yeah, Odyssey, Monument, Excel, and Odyssey. And then can you talk a little about what's happening now at South Boston High School?
Yeah, as and I think this has been the subject of some recent articles too, the sort of history of high school reform in Boston. The large comprehensive high schools that were neighborhood based were split up as part of a Gates funded initiative, small schools movement. And so South Boston High School was then split into three learning communities through, you know, I don't want to overstate sort of the cause and effect of each of these things, but almost all of these small learning communities have been closed across the city, obviously with West Roxbury Academy and Urban Science in the West Roxbury Education Complex being an example. And Excel High School, of those three, Excel High School is the only high school still remaining. And we have seen declines overall in high school enrollment. And Excel is certainly not separate from that. And there is a change in leadership at Excel for next year. And Jerlene John, who actually was here in the finance team for a little bit, we got to leverage a lot of her knowledge, is now as interim head of school over there for the spring. Those are some of the changes coming, but we plan to come back to the school committee in the fall with an update on sort of our high school planning that will both, as I mentioned earlier, relates to the high school athletics. What is our vision for the high school portfolio overall, and what are some changes that we expect to make? One of the things that we think will help a school like Excel is a 7 to 12 expansion, so that they can start to stabilize their enrollment and gain students in 7th grade and attract more families into the system. So those are updates that you should expect to see us coming back with in the fall for community conversations.
Okay, yeah, Nate, I know Monument, Excel at South Boston High, there's so much space in the building for something, you know, to bring more students on board. I'm just thinking out loud, Nate. You know, the money the Gates Foundation gave to the BPS to incorporate, to break down the schools into specific designs such as Monument with the focus on public safety, or Odyssey with the focus on science or biology or chemistry, Excel, similar. That system, it seems like that system didn't work. And then after we got all the money from the Gates Foundation, after a period of time, then the system failed under the Gates Foundation, and then these schools are struggling. Is that accurate?
I think that's accurate. I mean, we have at the same time gone through Commonwealth charter expansions. So I think there are multiple things that have happened to high schools over the last decade or so. One was the small schools movement, which was an unsuccessful academic intervention. The second was the rollout of Commonwealth charter schools at the high school level, which has decreased the share of students that are enrolling in Boston Public Schools. And the third is the broader demographic shifts. The current class of college freshmen, those that were seniors that graduated last year, was the largest class that we had as the last of the large sort of bubbles of classes moving through the system. And so we're now at a period of adjusting to the number of students in high school overall. So it's been both increased competition, some ill-advised strategy, and then some broader demographic trends. And so what we need to do as a district is figure out what is our response to that, and how do we use this opportunity with the 400 million coming in and federal relief as we start to reimagine, to make some investments to set our system up in perpetuity to be a better match to what our students need and what our families expect.
And my final question is, if a student is in high school and that high school doesn't have a particular sport that the student may want to play, does that student have the opportunity to go to another, not go to, but play on another team at a nearby public high school? How does that process work? I'm just curious about that.
We have pre-established cooperative agreements with schools. Typically, it's a larger school that may host a sport, or two schools in geographic region that would work with each other to field a team to have the opportunity for both schools. But in all those situations, it's not done on the fly. It's something that the schools should be are knowledgeable of, and everyone involved should be knowledgeable of in terms of where they pursue the opportunity. Some of our sports, the hockeys, the tennises, cross country, where some of the participation isn't as strong, or a citywide situation where we pull in, if a student at any of the schools was interested in participating in the sport, they could go to one school. But in other sports, a basketball, a football, a soccer, it may be one or two schools working together to have the opportunity to participate. So if there's a specific question or specific need from a school, we can work to point them in the right direction.
No, that's good information. Does BPS high school, do they have a swimming team? Does any school have a swimming team?
Yeah, swimming is actually one that flies under the radar, but there are 3 swimming teams,
okay.
Or excuse me, 4 swimming teams in the city. The 3 exam schools in East Boston. So, and one that's growing. We're looking to get more people involved.
The reason I was asking that is I was talking to Commissioner Morales last week at BCYF, and something that I want to continue to work with him on is getting more students exposed to swimming lessons, especially at the young ages in grade school. Does BPS have a program where you work with BCYF, especially to get kids, comfortable with the water, teach them the safety and health in the water issues? But also, I think it's critically important for communities of color students to be exposed to the water and to learn safety, swimming lessons, basically.
I mean, I'll speak and someone else can fill in, but I mean, I think exposure is a big piece of what we're looking at from an athletic and participation standpoint for the students of BPS. Obviously, there's a number of community schools, within BPS that work with BCYF that have the pools and the ability to teach the lessons. So I think as we kind of move forward with that and there's opportunities that present themselves, we should work, in a collaborative effort to make sure that the school communities, as well as the neighborhood communities, understand the opportunities and availability of lessons. Many schools do access their pools and teach lessons to their kids, but I think it's one of those things where we just need to be more direct in terms of where the opportunities are and make sure that the families are aware of those so they can take advantage of it.
Thank you, Council Block. I have no further questions. Just want to say thank you to the BPS team here, especially Avery. Those comments were excellent about swimming, the importance of swimming. So I want to say thank you, and I'll continue to work with you guys and with the BCYF team.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Flynn. Next up, Councillor Mejia.
Yes, thank you. I just have some follow-up questions. Mr. Taylor, I'm going back to you now, just so you know, coming in again. I have some questions about, I'm still, earlier, the superintendent opened up with the whole idea of the importance of building trust and how difficult it is to do just that. And, we've heard from a lot of folks in the community regarding Madison Park, who really do believe that, they've made some really great gains. And so I'm just curious in terms of what the tension, what role has the community played in helping to inform some of these conversations? And then I'm just curious if performance is an issue for Madison Park. There seems to be a disconnect as to if the performance is a problem, then we're going to be promoting the current leader into a district-wide position. There just seems to be somewhat of a disconnect there. So if you could help us understand that. And then I'm wondering if there's a report that goes to, that can talk to Madison Park and how it's been doing. And if there isn't a report, I think that it would be helpful for us to have a better understanding of the performance discrepancies that we have been naming in regards to Madison Park. So that's just something that I'd like to throw out there. I'm interested in hearing the question that I asked in regards to sexual assaults in Boston's public schools as an issue that was raised during our last hearing. And so just kind of would love to hear a little bit about what is being done to address that. I mean, I know that we've been remote, but I'm just curious now that we've transitioned back into schools, what, if anything, are we hearing? And then the last question is, we launched a initiative in our office around food insecurity to create culturally competent foods to our constituents. And I'm curious, a lot of students are always complaining about the Boston Public School lunch, and particularly my daughter, all day, every day. And so Nate, and I'm sure you hear the same thing from your kids. And so I'm curious, what if any opportunities exist to look at ways that we can contract our local vendors and restaurants right in our neighborhoods to be able to provide more culturally competent foods right here in our neighborhood. So those are just 3 questions that I'd like some clarity around.
Yeah. So I do know that the superintendent and the school superintendent, Linda McIntyre and Elia Bergerman, the high school superintendents, have been meeting with the Madison community over the past 2 years. So I know they've been working closely with the Madison Park school community and have made decisions based on some of those meetings. As it relates to some of the performance issues for specific individuals, I can't speak to that. My team is only involved as it relates to staffing and working with them to put together a search. We did bids for several search firms and to gather a search firm that can help them, expedite trying to find a dynamic leader. I don't know all the specifics that they're trying to solve there, But I do know that they have been meeting on a regular basis with the community, and they have the community involved in the as it relates to school site council and personnel subcommittees in the hiring process. So they are working with the community and several community groups that are tied into Madison pretty heavily in order to select a new leader.
Okay, so then I guess what about any performance, not towards the individual, but just in general performance outcomes for Madison Park? Can you
Yeah,
talk?
I think I can connect you with the school superintendents, and they can give you more specifics. I certainly can have Linda McIntyre, the high school superintendent that supervises Madison Park, to talk to you about those kinds of things. I do know that they want to really, really expand some of the partnerships and really get kids into some of the shops and things connected to the communities around some of the work that they're doing over there. But the high school superintendent would be the better person for you to talk all that through.
All right, awesome. Because I do agree that I believe that Madison, we should have a world-class woke tech. Everybody should be looking to us. And with all of the resources that the city of Boston has at its disposal, there's no reason why Madison shouldn't be getting all the love that they deserve. So I know I keep every hearing that I go to, I'm always talking about Madison Park, only just because I know it's just a gem, and I'm trying to protect it as much as possible.
Yeah,
so
I do know the whole purpose of them pursuing a new leader is to expand and get our kids off into those voc tech areas as it relates to career pathways. Hopefully our kids can come out of there licensed and ready to go right into the workforce. So
yep, absolutely. Thank you for that. So can we talk a little bit about the small opportunities to break up the contracts for food vendors and create more opportunities for small businesses and restaurants to kind of be able to provide our students with culturally competent foods that they will actually eat?
So thank you, Councilor Mejia, for that great question. I do want to make sure I go back and answer your question beforehand regarding food services staff and salaries. Yeah, when you had asked. So our average salary for part-time workers, which is anywhere between 4 hours and 7-hour employees, their starting pay is at least starts at $15.16, but it also varies based on how many years and if they have any experience. So it averages about $17,000 per year, but it's between September and June that they are paid. During the summer, they are not paid for part-time works. For our food services managers, their average salary starting at, depending on how many people they supervise, about $711 a week. So it averages anywhere between $37,000 and $43,000 a year, again, depending how many people they supervise, and they are paid year round. So the salary information that we shared regarding the 125 positions, it's actually based off of the hours the employee works, as well as when we roll out the school. So if the school is not going to start their new cafeteria until December, we probably wouldn't be hiring them until October. So for training purposes kind of thing. But in reference to your question regarding culturally competent food and opportunities to contract for smaller locations, and certainly we are always open to those opportunities. I think for us, in food services, we are a monster of a service, because we have 125 locations, 55,000 students that we're trying to provide meals for. But we have changed a lot of our procurement processes in the last 3-4 years, in particular, as well as we are incorporating the regulations and the city ordinance for the Good Food Purchasing Program, which is focusing on and evaluating companies besides price on 5 values, which is a local economy, that they're considered local, environmentally sustainable, the animal welfare, a valued workforce, as well as a nutritional component. For food services, our meals that we offer to children they have to be audited and meet very specific criteria, but we certainly are open to working with companies, local restaurants, and opportunities to be able to get ideas and recipes so that we can be able to use our own internal workforce as well to be able to make these meals. But we are always changing our processes so that we can be able to focus on different ways that we can be attractive. But we also know our volume is also sometimes can be limiting for smaller companies.
Yes. No, I think that I'm encouraged by that. And I also think that that's where, when we think about closing the wealth gap, when we think about all of the issues around everything that we talk about, it's just really thinking outside the box and creating as many opportunities to be able to support small businesses. And you know, it's a win-win for everybody,
Yes.
Including our kids.
And then I was just going to say, if there are companies or restaurants that you have spoken with, we're more than happy to have conversations, because that's also how we learn as an operation, to be able to expand based on what we know and what we've done in the past. And we're constantly learning and making, if we want to evaluate ourselves and change, so that we are thinking through what the expectations are, not only of the district, but also the city, so that we are, you know, open to change.
Yeah. So even if we do this on a regional scale, and yeah. So the last question around sexual assaults in the Boston Public Schools, just curious if there's, now that we're transitioning back, kind of just wanted to just get ahead of this as a concern, because we heard it last year during our public hearings, and just kind of wanted to see, Superintendent Coakley, what you know, what you've heard, and how are we getting ahead of it?
Thank you for the promotion. Very nice to see you again, Councilwoman Amahia. On the numbers for sexual assaults, those incidences are mandated reporting incidents, and they do fall in the line of our new reporting policy, report writing policy. And those reports go directly to BPD. So my officers are not writing any reports on sexual assaults. We do a follow-up inter-office report just to document the number of reports that actually come through Safety Service, sorry. But we also have a tremendous partnership with Andrea Amador in the behavior health, which focuses on the trauma response to those calls. I don't have a specific number on the sexual assault reports that actually come in, because I really would have to collaborate with BPD on those numbers, because they go, like I said, directly to BPD to have a designated police officer that comes in and actually does the reports. So I'd like to collaborate with them first before I give a specific number out, and then we could I could follow up that in the question box afterwards. Okay, but definitely Andrea Amador and her behavior health team, we do follow up on every incident that comes through sexual assault. Sexual assault BPD, just from my former life, I know have a very detailed process in which they deal with victims, a victim advocacy program also with that. So we're going to be working on collaboratively in the upcoming year, but we've been supporting them on the report process through BPS.
Yeah, thank you. And there's one last thing I'll say, is that I did swimming classes, so I do appreciate Counselor Flynn advocating for swimming, even though I didn't learn how to swim. But it was nice to have a pool. It was nice to have art. It was nice to have home ec. It was nice to have a lot of things. And I'm just really concerned that every single year we continue to increase the budget, but I just don't see the return on our investment in terms of just basic services for our students. And so I'm really hoping that we're really thinking about how we're utilizing the dollars that we get, and making sure that every single dollar is reflected in the classroom and supporting whole child education. So thank you all. And I do appreciate Councilor Bach allowing Councilor Flynn and myself to go on a little bit longer. I've seen that gavel, but I'm gonna shut my mouth right now and let my colleagues go. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Edwards.
Hi, I just want to follow up on some, I'll just list all my questions and then you guys can answer. I appreciate the information about athletics and our athletic program. I was wondering what BPS's policy is for trans kids, especially yeah, in general, what's the policy for trans kids? I saw some of the information about the workforce policy and work leave. And you may be aware that in City Council, we're working on updating our parental leave policy, specifically for loss of pregnancy. And I think in talking with BTU, there wasn't a real clarification as to whether teachers had the equivalent leave policies as other city workers. What we are looking to update the policy to do is to include loss of pregnancy for stillbirth, for miscarriage, and for termination of pregnancy. So I don't know if you have an opinion about that, or if you're working on that, or if we update it in one side, it automatically updates in the other. I also wanted to know, in terms of your partnership agenda, the streamlining and access to, it looked like it was kind of job preparation and or just exposure to different opportunities and making sure that kids had public-private partnership relationships. And I've seen right now in my district, some schools are better than others. What is the equitable understanding? Are you going to have BPS kind of contract or work with a large organization so that, and then all schools have access to that particular organization and partnership for internships, for whatever it is? Or are we going to, if one school manages to get a contract for partnership, are we going to encourage that school to open it up to other schools? And then finally, on transportation, the portal that's up, I really appreciate that. Every year I have the same family, the same problem. When busing starts, her child is always left behind, forgotten on the bus. Sometimes they forget he's on the bus. And it's every year like clockwork. I know that school started because I have a call from Lisa Malara about her son and the bus and issues. So this portal that's up, are we going to be able to live track and actually see where the buses are online or in real time? So those are my questions.
We'll answer your leave question first. I'll have my deputy, Chief Human Capital Officer, Ray Ketchens, my expert on leave.
Thanks for the kind words, Al. So we have, one of the things you mentioned about is the BTU contract consistent with leave and with our leave policy, and the short answer is no. And we know that, and we have a lot of work to do to partner with the BTU to make it consistent. And that is one of the big things that we're bringing to the table the next round. We'd like to make consistency with leave policies and collective bargaining contracts for every unit, not just the BTU. That is what's inconsistent, and using language that is consistent for same-sex couples, birthing and non-birthing parents. There's a lot that we need to do to get this outdated language caught up to 2021 and really serve our workforce the way it's supposed to be. So we know that there's a lot of work to do. I think we use the policies that are put forward by the city councilors and other lawmakers to guide what we do. It doesn't automatically trickle over because we just have a lot of other layers conflicting that would sort of prevent that from automatically triggering. But we do use the work of this team and this body to inform what we can put forward and do. So that's the short answer, is we're not there yet. We hope to get there in the next year or so, or 2 years. I'm not sure how long it's going to take us, but we do have intentions to try to make some cohesion amongst all of our collective bargaining units to give, equal rights for parental leave, not just maternity, which I think has been something that's been inconsistent for quite a while for us.
But I would note that consistency would not just be with the city. I mean, if you're still using those terms, you're inconsistent with state law.
Correct.
And so I would, inconsistency with state law, meaning not legally compliant, if you're still using those terms. So I would encourage you not to wait in the next year or so to become consistent with state law. You also have parental leave and status as a parent as a protected class in your city charter under the HRC. So if there's a class of workers as big as BPS that is not protected by that, I don't know that that's a collective bargaining issue so much as you just need to be compliant with civil rights.
Correct.
That's right.
There was also the question about trans athletes.
Yeah, I got
Policy
it.
and PPS.
Yeah, so at the state level, through the MIA and for interscholastic athletics, when dealing with transgender students, it's the gender that you identify with is the sport that you play. And that's how we handle it in BPS. So you identify, you play the sport.
Thank you. And then with the live tracking of the buses.
Yep,
Or
this is
real-time?
Angela. I can speak to that. So I think two things in response to your question. The first is I'm very sorry to hear that that family had that experience multiple years. There's two tools that we're using. The first is actually the Where's My School Bus app, which is its role is to provide that real-time tracking for families. And I think definitely if the family is experiencing issues with that, we would love to help and figure out the situation there. But that is the real-time tracking portion. The online portal is actually around providing information on like policies, especially this year with the reopenings, what's kind of going on with transportation. There's an access to chat, and there's also on the back end, it handles the ticketing for issues from families and staff so that there's tracking of all of those issues. And one of the things we are doubling down on with the staff is repeat issues that we're seeing for families and staff members. So I think this would be one of those cases where I'll make sure to go back with the team and we'll talk also about, as we go into the next school year, opportunities to check for repeat offenses, I shouldn't say offenses, issues across longer timeframes. Because I think right now we're mostly looking at shorter timeframes, but it sounds like this family is experiencing it from year to year.
Thank you. And then the partnership question.
Absolutely. So I'm going to answer it in a couple different sections. In relating to partnerships and preparation for job opportunities, every school has access to the PIC, the Private Industry Council, and that's available across the district. It's one of only 3 district level partnerships to allow students and all schools to take advantage of. In regards to ensuring equity across partnerships, we do have the partnership fund, which is dictated by our opportunity index scores, which helps allocate funds to pay for partnerships across the district according to need at the school level. I'm not sure I answered all of your question though. What else can I tell you?
Sure. So there's two district-wide I guess, balances to what schools do already for themselves, right? And how do we know that those district-wide or city-wide are actually assuring equity? Access to something, right, isn't the same as being equitable when there are schools that, because of the concentration of lawyers, doctors, corporate employee parents, they have beyond connections to access to certain things that other schools don't. So that's the question of equity I think I have. I know, thank you for explaining that there is a citywide private industry council and that there's some funds, I guess, from this fund amount. I don't know what does it fund people to work someplace?
Oh, so the partnership fund is funds that are allocated at the school level. And then the school leader, in conjunction with their school site council, make decisions about priorities for partnership. Okay. Like what are the priorities that they feel that the school needs that a partnership could then fulfill? And those funds are used to pay for that partnership to fill that need.
Like a playground.
So that would be more of a capital investment, I believe.
Give me an example then, yeah.
Absolutely. So the Mario Umana, I'm just going to make this one up actually, but like the Mario Umana school could decide that they wanted to have dance opportunities or public performance or performance arts opportunities for students. They could engage Veronica Ropale's Cultural Center. They could engage Ballet Rocks. They could engage the Bach Center. They would have the choice to bring one of those partners in to provide performance and dance opportunities to students.
Is this, and so is there a cap on what schools can ask for in terms of the funding?
It's part of our weighted student funding formula, so it's based on the enrollment and the characteristics of the students. One of the things that this has been a multi-year effort that we wanted to move away from sort of, when we get into central allocated partnerships, there can be a bit of a disconnect, but there can be a sort of challenge with equity, which is if we're not using data to drive who receives the funding, that we're not being potentially as critical of our own decisions. And so that was the move to allocate it through the weighted student funding formula to be school-based partnerships decisions. And then what we do is through our budget collaborative process, which is the process where every school leader comes in and meets with a central team, we review their plan for partnership funding, and there is a waiver process if they want to use it for different purposes. But it starts with the premise that this is meant to fund specific partnerships. And I think I would imagine for you, Councilor Edwards, the stark contrast between some of our schools is
In my district.
in your district alone is, you have the Elliott, which is probably our lowest economic need school in the district, and then some of our really high needs, high poverty schools,
Like the Harvard Kent.
the Harvard Kent or in East Boston. And so what we wanted to do is be able to differentiate. And there are some neighborhood-based factors. What we wanted to do is recognize that there are concentrations of need. But the goal, and we're constantly looking for ways to innovate and infuse more equity into these decisions. But the goal is to sort of identify those factors that may correlate with some of the things you referenced, right? If they have a lot of lawyers and connections, they can get resources to their school, or whatever sort of social capital schools have. We want to start to level the playing field as much as possible. So that is our goal. And if you have other ideas that we should be looking at, we're always sort of open to that.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, Margaret. Congrats again on the new job. I'm sorry I didn't say that earlier, but so thank you both. And I will follow up on that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Edwards. And then I just wanted to ask Neva, if you could speak a little bit to, you mentioned having a number of vacancies on your staff. In terms of the budget slide that you threw up, or the team threw up, about, there being a chief, a deputy, 2 directors, 19 superior officers, 54 officers. So am I understanding correctly that it's level funded in terms of personnel in the proposed budget, but that you, in fact, because you have a bunch of vacancies that have come over the last 9 to 10 months, you're underspending that right now? Is that right?
That's correct right now. I have individuals that are still on, I have about 4 to 5 individuals that are on presently on FMLA. I have a couple of individuals that are on workman's comp prior to even me assuming the position. I have about maybe about 4 or 5 individuals that have left in between the budgeting cycle. That means within the last 8 to 9 months. So that's what that accounts for.
Okay. And then how many vacancies do you have overall? Like, how many vacancies did you already have even before the budgeting cycle?
Right now we are at I have a total of about 52 working, and I think I'm budgeted for about around 75.
Yeah. So and is that an unusual level of attrition?
Yes, I think just considering the recent climate and atmosphere around policing, a lot of individuals are leaving expeditiously. Right now, unfortunately, weekly, I'm getting referrals from other departments of officers wanting to move on, either other departments or other, as I think Mr. Taylor spoke earlier, their partners are moving on to other areas. And I think a lot of it's attributed to somewhat morale in policing and deciding to do other roles. So yes.
And in terms of, I mean, you mentioned officer, and I know we're going to get that list from you, but you mentioned officers being assigned to schools based on population, et cetera. Like obviously there's not enough officers, even when the force is at full strength for somebody at every school. So how do you all make those decisions?
Right now, not really a fortunate thing, but just a sign of a time based on the COVID, it was a little more reasonable to figure out our deployment just because the population of the schools presently. But moving into September, what we usually look at is the population of students that are in the schools, the number of incidences that historically have been a result of those schools, and also particular areas. Some areas have a call alout for different instances that may affect the schools. So we try to have our deployment based on the circumstances around the schools. We've done a very good job of it. I can just say that our numbers have consistently gone down, not only in arrests, but just incidences that involve in the schools. I think that is a result of us being really proactive. I think we spoke earlier about some of the great work that our food service and athletics is doing, but we try to support them with that. We've been out there supporting the food sites every day, particularly for the time that they're held, just to make sure we have coverage in those. We also look to support the athletics department in the different events that go on, particularly at night. So it depends on the circumstances, the events, the time, the number of students that are at a particular school. That's how we really determine how many officers we need.
Got it. And how about, I mean, obviously we've been having conversations over on the other side. The city's proposing a 911 alternative response pilot to think about the types of calls that come into 911, but really would be better dealt with by a non-police response. Have you guys had an analogous conversation about what it is that your school police officers are dealing with and what types of things maybe would be better dealt with by different personnel with different qualifications?
Well, I think what we did in that evaluation is we looked at our report writing systems and information sharing policy. It was just enacted prior to me coming, but it's been, we've been really paying I'm in a working group now that focuses on the actual data. We're still working on that progress. We meet with the superintendent once a month on those numbers. We've done 2 meetings so far. So that's what our thought process is. We look at the type of incidences that do require reports, not just because a victim is requiring a report, but also legally what we're bound to do reports on. So we really streamline that. I think we're working really aggressively and supportively of really looking at that in more detail moving forward. But it's definitely a work in progress and it's very valuable to us. I think we looked at some of the issues that were former as far as the number of reports that we're writing. But I think we're doing a really good job so far in really streamlining that policy. Making sure that our officers are trained every year on the policy. So the number of reports that are written on particular incidences has definitely significantly gone down.
Great, thank you. And how do you think about, I mean, I don't mean this question hostilely to you and the work of the department at all. I guess I struggle a lot with the fact, I grew up very privileged. I went to private schools. And never in my educational experience was I ever policed at school. Like there was never anybody, there were occasionally school security officers who were standing outside the doors, making sure that no one got into the school. But they're just, and there was never a situation where if a fight did break out in a hallway that was leading to a police report because there was nobody around to make a mandatory report of any kind. And so I just think just knowing that that even the opportunity for that wasn't there when I was in school for that reason makes me concerned about sort of the framework that our BPS students encounter, even when we're operating with the best of intentions and trying to limit the things that we do mandatory reports for. So I wonder, like, kind of how you and of course also if Nate or anybody wants to speak to sort of how you think about that.
I think that's the question that is dictating a lot of the police reform, not just in Boston, but I think across the country. And we think very passionately, as I mentioned before, I think Boston has been a lead model in policing and models of intervention and prevention. I think I kind of adopted that model coming over to BPS, really having a in-depth career of supporting young people throughout our communities. And I don't take that lightly. I think our report writing policy speaks to some really mandatory issues in which police reports are required. And we have to understand as well, we do have victims. And in some cases, victims require reports. I think we're looking at that instance in Streamline. Sorry. I'm sorry. But I also think that our police officers are a bit different. As I spoke on a number of different venues, our police officers are not just, security officers, not only and excluded to maintaining safety and security of the building, but we are, the mentors in the building. We are the coaches in the building. We are, the support service, the stability and familiarity in the schools. We're looking at a number of students coming and going from all different environments. And I've heard some conversations with students and really being engaged in the community and continue to be engaged in the community that they really appreciate having our school police officers in the building. Most of my officers have young people, have family and children in the buildings. So I think that it's a different perception of just policing. I think there's a lot of reform that's happening that we are really paying close attention to on a weekly basis. And we're definitely in a position to do some tremendous improvements and changes. But I think that we add a special balance to the safety and security in the education of our students in the system, not just a enforcement practice.
Well, thank you for that answer.
Thank you.
All right, I think with that, that's going to conclude. That ends our second round of questions, and I think it's time for us to go to public testimony. I know we do have a member of the public who's been waiting patiently. So before I do that, I just want to give you, Nate, or anybody a chance if you want to say any final word before we go. I know that we've come to the end of a large number of hearings. Obviously, we're going to continue to be in conversation, in the lead up to the budget vote, and I think that there's, you guys have a parallel process going on around the ESSER federal funds, and that's something that the council remains very interested in, and especially, as I've expressed on a number of occasions, interested in understanding for the FY22 year before we take that vote. But I do really appreciate the amount of detail that the team has brought to this succession of hearings, and the many sheer hours that you have devoted to answering our questions. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you all. And I definitely appreciate the opportunity, as the superintendent said at the start, for us to be able to explain our budget to the community. This plays an important role in you asking questions for your constituents, but then us being able to provide the time and space for our staff to explain the great work that we're doing. I would just close by reminding everyone, in the way that we opened, we have a tremendous task ahead of us. And the one thing that makes this different and sets Boston apart is that we have the resources to be able to meet the needs of our students. This budget rolls out significant investments in school-based, with $36 million in new investments, on top of then our opportunity to think about ESSER to reshape our district. And so, I do ask for all of your support in this budget so that we can do we can really dive into the hard work, and many of the staff on this call, that they can dive into really implementing this budget and making sure that we're successful in meeting the needs of our students. Just so Megan doesn't tase me afterwards, I think our goal here is, of course, to return well. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do, recover strong, and then, of course, reimagine what's possible for our students. In our budget, we feel does that. And thank you for the opportunity over the last few weeks to really explain that to the public.
Thank you. Thanks, Nate. That trio of words has a real ring to it. You might want to put it on a bumper sticker or something. No, thank you all again so much. And now I'm just going to take public comment. I've got Mr. James Kavanaugh signed up. If there's anybody else who's watching this at home and you have the Zoom link, now would be the time to come join the Zoom, because we're going to take that public testimony before we conclude. So, Mr. Kavanaugh, the floor is yours. James, you need to unmute. Just gonna wait for a second. I feel badly if James has been waiting all this time and then stepped away for a moment and then all right, I'll give it one more minute. All right, since we aren't hearing from James, I'm gonna ask James to submit written testimony or a video, or to come at the 6 o'clock public testimony hearing tonight, and I'll put you right at the top. But that's just a reminder to anybody who is watching. If you've watched this or other BPS budget hearings and you would like to make your voice heard and you haven't had a chance to come tonight at 6 p.m., we're having a dedicated public testimony hearing, and you can find the place to sign up by going to boston.gov/budget-testify. Or if you can't find that, shoot us an email at ccc.wm@boston.gov, and we'll connect you with that link. And we would love to hear from you tonight at 6. And with that, this hearing of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you, Councilor. Have a good day.
You too.
Thank you.